Let me tell you something about the smell of brake fluid. It doesn't wash off. You can scrub your hands with that orange pumice soap until your knuckles are raw, run them under water so hot it turns your skin pink, and 6 hours later you'll scratch your nose and there it is again. Chemical, sharp, like something between nail polish remover and burnt rubber. That smell lives in the creases of your fingerprints. It gets under your nails and stays there like a secret. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand what kind of man I was when this story started. I was the kind of man who came home smelling like brake fluid and axle grease 5 days a week, sometimes 6. The kind of man who worked the lift at Midas on Fredericksburg Road for $9 an hour more than he'd made 10 years ago and called that progress. The kind of man who had a bad left knee from a high school football injury that never healed right, who popped 3 ibuprofen before every shift and told himself he'd see a doctor about it eventually, the way you tell yourself you'll fix the gutter or clean the garage. Eventually. Always eventually. My name is Adrian Delgado. I was 34 years old. And on a Thursday evening in October of 2015, I walked through my front door in San Antonio, Texas, and everything in my life looked exactly the way it was supposed to look. Ashley was in the kitchen. The house smelled like seared peppers and onions, that deep, earthy sweetness that fills a room when someone's making fajitas the right way, with the cast iron skillet my mother left us before she passed. Ashley had her back to me. Her dark hair was pulled up in a messy knot. She was wearing those gray cotton shorts she always wore around the house and one of my old Spurs t-shirts that hung off her shoulder. She was humming something. I couldn't tell what, and her phone was face down on the counter. Now I need you to pay attention to that detail. Because 6 months earlier, that phone lived face up on the counter or on the arm of the couch or wherever she happened to set it down, screened to the ceiling like it had nothing to hide. She used to hand it to me without thinking. Check the weather. Look up that restaurant. Read me that text from my sister, my hands are covered in flour. The phone was just a phone, a thing, neutral. Harmless, I don't know exactly when it flipped over. That's the thing about the moment your life starts to crack. You never hear the first fracture. It's not a sound. It's an absence. Something that was there and then wasn't, and you can't point to the day it disappeared because you weren't paying attention. You were working. You were tired. You were trusting your wife because that's what marriage is. You trust and you trust and you trust, and you don't even realize the trust has become a habit instead of a choice, a reflex instead of a decision, until the day you notice the phone is face down and you can't remember when it started. She turned around and smiled at me. The real one, the one that shows her slightly crooked bottom teeth, the one I fell in love with at a friend's barbecue 8 years ago when she laughed so hard at something I said that she spilled her beer on my shoes and didn't even notice. That smile. It still worked on me. That's the part nobody warns you about. The smile still works even when everything behind it has already rotted. Hey babe, fajitas in 10. I kissed her on the forehead. I smelled her shampoo, something coconut, something new. She used to use the same brand for years. Suave green apple, the kind you buy at H-E-B because it's $3 and it works. Now it was coconut, a small thing, a nothing thing. One more nothing in a pile of nothings that was slowly taking shape into something I didn't want to look at. I washed my hands at the kitchen sink. The brake fluid smell fought the dish soap and won the way it always does. Ashley set the table. We moved around each other in that kitchen the way married people do after 7 years, a choreography so practiced it looks effortless, bodies that know how to share a small space without collision. She reached past me for the tortillas. I stepped left. She opened the fridge. I stepped right. A dance for 2 people who'd stopped hearing the music but still remembered the steps. Earlier that day, something had happened at work that I'd been trying not to think about. Blake Trevino, the oil change tech who worked the bay next to mine, had said something while we were both on our backs under separate cars. Blake was 29, loud, funny in the way guys are funny when they've been through enough pain to know that laughing is cheaper than therapy. He'd been separated from his wife for about 4 months by then, sleeping on his cousin's couch, eating gas station breakfast tacos every morning, pretending he was fine with a conviction that fooled nobody. He'd said it casually, like a comment about the weather. Hey man, I saw Ashley's car at the Starbucks on Hubner today, the one by the Lowe's. I was torquing a caliper bolt. My wrench didn't slip, but my brain did. The Starbucks on Hubner Road is nowhere near the dental office on Bandera where Ashley works as a receptionist. It's a 20-minute drive in the wrong direction. The only reason to be at that Starbucks is if you're in that part of town for another reason. She probably had an errand, I said. Blake didn't respond right away. 3 seconds of silence under 2 separate cars, and if you've never worked in a shop, you might not understand what that silence means. In a garage, silence is diagnostic. When a mechanic hears something wrong in an engine, there's a pause. Everyone stops. You listen. You listen not for the sound, but for what the sound means. You don't say anything because saying something makes it real, and once it's real, you have to deal with it. That was the pause Blake gave me. A mechanic's pause, the kind that says I hear it too, but I'm not going to be the one to name it. I said nothing else. He said nothing else. We went back to work. I finished the brake job, collected my ticket, moved on to an alignment. The day continued the way days do, but that pause stayed with me. I carried it home like a stone in my pocket, and I could feel it sitting there while I stood in my kitchen watching my wife set the table with the phone face down 3 inches from her left hand. Over dinner, I tried to do the thing I always do, normal conversation. How was your day? Anything happen at the office? The usual machinery of a marriage grinding through its evening gears. Ashley was distracted. She kept glancing at the phone, not picking it up, just checking it was still there the way you check your pocket for your wallet. An unconscious gesture that was becoming very conscious to me. Then it buzzed. She picked it up, looked at the screen, and laughed. A short, private laugh. The kind that belongs to someone else's joke. What's funny? Oh, just Alexis being dumb. Alexis Herrera. Ashley's coworker at the dental office. Her best friend, or whatever that word means when you're 31 and your friendships are built around lunch breaks and shared complaints about patients who don't floss. I'd met Alexis maybe a dozen times. She was fine, talked a lot. Drank white wine at every gathering like it was a personality trait. I nodded. How was work? And here's where I need you to listen carefully, because what Ashley said next wasn't suspicious on its own. It was the way she said it. It was fine. I was at the front desk until like 2, then I did filing in the back for a couple hours. Then Dr. Garza had me call some insurance companies about claims. I was on hold for like 40 minutes with Blue Cross. You know how they are. Too much detail, too organized. A real answer about a boring day at work sounds like, fine, long, I'm tired. It does not sound like a timeline. It does not come with timestamps and location data. She was building an alibi for a question I hadn't asked, and she didn't even realize she was doing it, which meant she'd been practicing. In the car, probably, on the drive home. Rehearsing normalcy the way an actor runs lines before the curtain goes up. I ate my fajitas. They were good. She was a good cook. She'd learned from her mother, who'd learned from her mother, West Side women who could turn cheap skirt steak and a bag of peppers into something that made you feel like the world was solid and warm and dependable. The food was honest even when the person making it wasn't. We watched television after dinner. Some reality show she liked that I pretended to follow. She curled up on the other end of the couch with a blanket and her phone, scrolling and smiling at things I couldn't see. I watched her reflection in the dark window behind the TV. She looked happy, not with me, just happy. The distinction was a knife I didn't know how to hold. I went to bed at 10:30. She came in at 11. We lay in the dark on opposite sides of a queen-sized mattress, 3 feet apart, which is the exact distance between 2 people who are married and 2 people who are strangers, depending on what fills the gap. I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling fan. It rotated slowly in the dark, each blade cutting a shadow across the ceiling when a car's headlights passed outside. I counted the rotations. 7, 14, 21, a mechanic's habit. Count the rotations, check the timing, diagnose the problem. But I wasn't diagnosing anything. I was avoiding the diagnosis, because I already knew. Somewhere beneath the conscious layer of my brain, in the animal part that doesn't need evidence because it runs on instinct, I already knew. At 2:14 a.m., her phone vibrated on the nightstand. Then again, and again. 3 buzzes in quick succession, the aggressive pattern of someone sending multiple texts. Not a notification, not an app. A person, at 2 in the morning. A person who was thinking about my wife at 2 in the morning with enough urgency to send 3 messages in a row. I lay there, perfectly still. The phone buzzed against the wood like a wasp trapped in a jar. That's exactly what it sounded like. That angry, trapped, insistent vibration. I could have reached over. I could have picked it up. The screen would have lit up and shown me the name, and whatever was left of the fiction I was living inside would have ended right there, in the blue-white glow of a lock screen notification at 2 in the morning. I didn't touch it. I want you to understand something. I didn't check her phone that night, not because I trusted her, because I was terrified of what I already knew. There's a difference between not knowing and choosing not to look. The first one is innocence. The second one is cowardice, and I was a coward that night. A coward lying 3 feet from a woman he'd shared 7 years with, listening to another man's messages vibrate through the dark. Ashley didn't wake up. She slept through it the way she slept through everything now, deep and satisfied, the sleep of someone whose conscience has made peace with its own betrayal through the simple act of repetition. Do something terrible enough times and it stops feeling terrible. It just becomes Tuesday. I got up. I went to the garage. I sat in my truck with the engine off, in the dark, with the smell of old motor oil and vinyl seats, and the faint ghost of brake fluid that lives in everything I own. I opened the glove compartment and found the emergency pack of Marlboro Reds I'd kept there for 3 years, since the day I quit smoking. The cellophane was dusty. I peeled it off. I shook a cigarette loose and put it between my lips and found the lighter I'd also kept, because quitting and being ready to unquit are the same thing when you're a man who prepares for the worst. The flame was small and orange in the darkness of the cab. It lit up my face in the rearview mirror. I looked at myself. Tired eyes. The start of lines around my mouth that hadn't been there 5 years ago. Grease permanently embedded in the creases of my knuckles. I didn't recognize the man looking back at me, not because he'd changed. Because the world around him had changed and he was the last one to notice. I smoked the whole cigarette down to the filter. My first in 3 years. It tasted like punishment and relief at the same time. Then I went back inside, lay down next to my wife, and pretended to sleep until the alarm went off at 5:30. She got up, showered, kissed me on the cheek, and went to work. Her phone went with her, face down in her purse, always within arm's reach. I made coffee. The machine started its automatic cycle, gurgling and spitting the way it did every morning, filling the kitchen with that familiar mechanical sound. The sound of routine. The sound of a life that was still going through the motions even though the engine was already knocking. I drank my coffee. I went to work. I changed brake pads on a 2009 Camry and told the owner she also needed new rotors. She said she'd think about it. People always say they'll think about it. They don't want to know how bad it is. They just want to keep driving. I understood the feeling. Saturday morning. Ashley stood in the bedroom doorway in yoga pants and a tank top, hair in a ponytail, gym bag over her shoulder. The gym bag was new, purple, Nike. Not the kind of thing you buy when you've been going to Planet Fitness for a while and your old bag is falling apart. The kind of thing you buy when you want to look a certain way for someone. Heading to the gym, back in a couple hours. She said it the way she said everything now, bright, practiced, a sentence with no edges you could grip. Cool, have a good workout. She left. I heard the front door close. I heard her car start in the driveway, the familiar sound of her silver Honda Civic, 2012, 140,000 miles, a car I'd maintained myself because we couldn't afford the shop rates even at the shop where I worked. I listened to it back out. I listened to it drive away. I stood in the kitchen for about 2 minutes looking at the counter where the phone usually sat, face down. The counter was empty now. She'd taken it with her. I hated myself for what I did next. I want to be honest about that. I didn't feel righteous. I didn't feel like a detective. I felt like a man doing something shameful because the shame of not knowing had become worse than the shame of checking. I got in my truck and drove to the Planet Fitness on Ingram Road. It took 12 minutes. Saturday traffic on the west side. A couple of red lights. I pulled into the parking lot and scanned for her Civic. Gray isn't a memorable color, but I know every scratch and dent on that car because I'm the one who's been meaning to fix them. She wasn't there. I told myself she might be inside. Maybe she'd parked on the other side of the building. I drove around. Slowly, like a man looking for a parking space, which is exactly what I would have said if anyone had asked. I circled the entire building. A Planet Fitness on a Saturday morning in San Antonio is not empty. There were cars everywhere. Hers was not one of them. I parked. I sat there for 20 minutes. I watched people walk in and out with their water bottles and their earbuds and their uncomplicated Saturday mornings, and I tried to talk myself out of what I already knew. Maybe she switched gyms. Maybe she stopped at the store first. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation, and I was sitting in a parking lot at 9 in the morning, slowly becoming the kind of man who checks up on his wife like a possessive, insecure fool. But I wasn't a possessive, insecure fool. I was a man whose wife wasn't where she said she'd be. Those are different things, even though the behavior looks the same from the outside. I drove home. I sat in the driveway for a long time. The house looked the same as it always did. A small, two-bedroom place on the near west side, the kind of house that was modest by any standard but represented everything I'd been able to build on a mechanic's salary. A patchy yard. A chain-link fence. A barbecue grill in the back that had rusted in the San Antonio humidity because I kept forgetting to cover it. It was ours, or it was supposed to be. Ashley came home 2 hours later, slightly flushed, hair damp. Good workout? So good I'm going to be sore tomorrow. Which machines did you do? A tiny pause, not long, half a second. The kind of pause that only matters if you're listening for it. Treadmill, some weights, the usual. She went to take a shower. The second one of the morning if the gym story was true, the only one if it wasn't. I stood in the kitchen. The walls still held the faint smell of last night's dinner, fajitas again. We ate a lot of fajitas. It was what we could afford, and it was what she knew how to cook, and there was a time when that felt like enough. "What do you do while I was gone?" she called from the hallway. "Watched the game," I said. There was no game on. It was 9 in the morning. She didn't catch the lie because she wasn't paying attention to mine, only protecting hers. We stood in the same house, in the same kitchen, both of us lying and neither of us calling the other on it. That's what the end of a marriage looks like before anyone says the word out loud. It's two people lying in the same room and pretending the air doesn't taste different. Monday. Ashley left for work at 8. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of coffee that went cold while I stared at our shared credit card statement. I'd never looked at it this carefully. When you trust someone, the credit card statement is just numbers. $22 here, $14 there, gas, groceries, the boring math of a shared life. I'd always glanced at the total and moved on. Now I read every line. There were 2 lunch charges at restaurants Ashley had never mentioned. One at a place on Broadway near the Pearl that I'd never heard of. $18, one at a taco spot on McCullough. $14 and change, small amounts. The kind of charges that disappear in the noise of a monthly statement, but Ashley and I had an unspoken system. We ate cheap. Whataburger, Taco Cabana, leftovers. We didn't do sit-down lunches on a receptionist's salary because there was no room in the budget for that. These charges were small, but they didn't belong to our life. Then I found the one that stopped me, a charge at a bar on the St. Mary's Strip, $22, from a Thursday night 3 weeks ago. A Thursday night when Ashley told me she was at Alexis's apartment watching a movie. $22 at a bar, that's about 3 drinks in San Antonio, maybe 4 if you're drinking Wells during happy hour. On a night she said she was on her friend's couch. I stared at that charge. $22, the price of a lie, itemized and time-stamped by Visa. I took screenshots. I didn't know why. Some instinct I couldn't name. A squirrel burying nuts before a winter it can feel coming but can't explain. At work on Monday, I almost destroyed a customer's engine. I was doing a routine oil change on a Ford F-150, which is a job I could do blindfolded. Drain the old oil, replace the filter, refill, check the level, done. But I was somewhere else in my head. I was in that parking lot at Planet Fitness. I was reading credit card statements. I was lying in the dark listening to a phone vibrate at 2 a.m., and my hand slipped and I nearly cross-threaded the drain plug. If you cross-thread a drain plug, the oil leaks. The customer drives 50 miles, the engine runs dry, and you've just cost somebody a $5,000 repair because your mind was in another zip code. It's a rookie mistake. The kind of mistake a first-week kid makes, not a guy with 9 years on the lift. Blake saw it. He was in the next bay, pretending not to watch, but Blake was always watching. That was his gift and his curse. He noticed things. It's what made him a good mechanic and a terrible husband, because noticing things in a marriage means you can never pretend you don't see the problems. Lunch break. The Midas break room was a windowless rectangle that smelled permanently like burnt coffee and rubber. The refrigerator hummed. A motivational poster on the wall said teamwork above a picture of a rowing crew that none of us related to in any way. Blake unwrapped his Whataburger. I unwrapped mine. For a while, we just ate. Then Blake said, without looking at me, "You almost grenaded that F-150. I know. You haven't slept." It wasn't a question. Not much. He chewed, swallowed, took a drink of his Big Red, then he told me something I didn't ask for but needed to hear. When things started going sideways with Carmen, I told myself for a year that I was imagining it. A whole year, she was texting somebody. She was going out more. She was picking fights over nothing because if she was angry at me, she didn't have to feel guilty about what she was doing behind my back. And I sat there like an idiot, telling myself it was stress. It was her job. It was her mother driving her crazy. I had an excuse for every red flag because hope is a hell of a drug, Adrian. It's the most addictive substance on the planet. You will mainline that stuff into your veins until it kills you. He crumpled his wrapper. He looked at me. If you're not sleeping, there's a reason. Your gut knows before your brain does. Your gut always knows. I got angry, not at Blake. At the fact that he was right and I could feel it in my chest, in that cold stone that had been sitting in my stomach since Thursday night. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say he was projecting his situation onto mine. I wanted to say Ashley wasn't Carmen, but the words wouldn't come because my mouth knew they were lies even if my brain was still negotiating. We ate the rest of our Whataburger in silence. Two mechanics in a break room that smelled like rubber, not talking about the things that were tearing them apart. That's how men handle it. Not all men, but the kind of men who work with their hands and swallow their feelings with fast food and call it lunch. That evening, the thing that changed everything, Ashley was in the shower. I could hear the water running, the particular sound of our old shower head that had two settings, weak and slightly less weak. She was humming again. I recognized it this time. Beady beady bomb bomb. Selena. Ashley loved Selena the way every woman who grew up on the West Side loves Selena. It was genetic, mandatory, a cultural sacrament. I was in the bedroom folding laundry. Her clothes and mine in separate piles, which is how we'd always done it, a small domestic system that used to feel efficient and now felt like practice for living apart. Her phone was on the bed. She'd left it there when she went to shower, which was unusual. The phone had become an extension of her body in recent weeks. But maybe the bathroom counter was wet. Maybe she was careless. Maybe God or the universe or whatever you believe in decided that this was the moment. It lit up. I was 3 feet away, close enough to see the notification on the lock screen without touching it, close enough to read the name and the preview text before the screen went dark again. The contact name said, Alexis 2. The preview text said, can't stop thinking about last night. When can I? And it cut off. The rest of the message hidden behind the lock screen, but I didn't need the rest. I didn't need it the way you don't need to see the whole iceberg to know the ship is in trouble. Alexis 2. She'd saved his number under a fake name, not even a creative one, not a coworker's name, not a code. Alexis 2. As if she had 2 friends named Alexis and this was the second one. The laziness of the lie was almost worse than the lie itself. It meant she hadn't even respected me enough to try hard. My hands stopped moving. I was holding one of her t-shirts, a soft gray thing with a faded print from some 5K run she'd done years ago, back when we did things together, back when Saturdays were for sleeping in and grocery shopping and the kind of ordinary life that feels boring until you lose it. I was gripping that shirt so hard my knuckles went white. The shower was still running. Selena was still playing. Beady beady bomb bomb, a love song. She was in there humming a love song while another man's message sat on the bed between us. I put the shirt down. I finished folding the laundry. I put her pile on her side of the dresser and my pile on mine. When she came out of the bathroom with a towel around her hair and steam following her like a ghost, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, looking normal, looking like a man who just folded laundry and nothing else. Everything okay? She asked. Yeah, just tired. Later, in bed in the dark, she reached for me, her hand on my arm. A gesture that used to mean comfort, connection, the wordless language of a marriage that still worked. But when her fingers touched my skin, I flinched. An involuntary jerk like touching something hot. I couldn't help it. My body knew what my mouth still wouldn't say. She noticed. I know she noticed because her hand stopped. She pulled it back slowly. And for 1 second, maybe two, our eyes met in the dark. No pretending, no lies, just two people looking at each other across a pillow with the full weight of what was happening sitting between them like a third body in the bed. Neither of us said anything. She rolled over. I rolled over. The ceiling fan turned. I counted the rotations and didn't sleep. Sunday, I drove to my father's house. Antonio Vega lived alone in a small house off Zarzamora Street, the same house he'd lived in for 30 years, the house where he'd raised me, the house where my mother had died 4 years ago in the back bedroom after a cancer that ate her from the inside like fire-eating paper. He was 58, retired postal worker. 32 years carrying mail bags through San Antonio summers that hit 105 degrees and San Antonio winters that barely dropped below 50. His hands were rough and steady. His back was straight. He was a man who never complained about anything because he considered complaining a form of weakness, which is both admirable and impossible to live up to. He was on the front porch when I pulled up. Fixing a screen door hinge. Of course he was. Antonio was always fixing something. Gutters, faucets, fences, hinges, the physical infrastructure of a house that he maintained with the same quiet devotion he'd given his wife, his son, his male root. When you asked Antonio how he was doing, he'd tell you about the thing he was fixing because that was his answer. He was doing the work. He was always doing the work. I sat on the porch step. He didn't look up from the hinge. We existed in comfortable silence for a while, two men who didn't need to fill the air with words because the air between us had always been warm enough on its own. "Pop," I said, "can I ask you something?" "You can ask. Did you ever have a time with Mom where you just knew something was wrong? But you didn't want to find out what it was?" His screwdriver stopped. Not dramatically, not like a movie, just a pause. The same pause Blake had given me under the cars. The diagnostic pause, the one that means I hear what you're really asking. He tightened the screw. One more turn. Then he set the screwdriver down on the porch railing and looked at the street. Not at me, at the street. At the row of small houses and chain-link fences and cracked sidewalks that made up the world he'd lived in for 3 decades. "When your mother got sick," he said, "I knew before the doctor did." He stopped. I waited. I could see it in the way she started organizing things, putting labels on boxes in the closet, writing down where she kept the insurance papers, the deed, the recipes. She was preparing, getting the house ready for after. Another pause. I pretended I didn't see it. For 2 months, I walked past those labeled boxes every day and told myself she was just being organized, spring cleaning in October. He picked the screwdriver back up, turned it in his hands without using it. Those 2 months were the worst of my life, worse than when she died. Because at least when I knew I could do something, I could take her to the doctor, I could hold her hand, I could fight. But those 2 months when I was pretending, I was just standing still while the ground moved under me. He looked at me then, a look that said, "I know you're not asking about your mother. Whatever it is, Mijo, don't stand still." I drove home. The sun was going down over San Antonio, painting the sky that particular shade of orange and pink that happens in October when the heat is finally breaking, when the air starts to feel like it's been holding its breath all summer and is finally letting go. I drove through streets I'd known my whole life, past the H-E-B where Ashley and I used to shop together on Sunday mornings, past the church where we got married, past the corner where I first kissed her, leaning against my truck at 2 in the morning after a night out, both of us too young and too happy to know that happiness is a loan, not a gift, and the interest rate is brutal. I made a decision. Sitting at a red light on Zarzamora, watching the cross traffic pass, I made the decision the way you tighten a bolt. One clean turn, final. I was going to find out the truth, all of it, even if it burned everything I'd built to the ground, because my father was right. Standing still while the ground moves is worse than falling. At least when you fall, you know where you are, you know which way is down, and you can start figuring out how to get back up. The light turned green. I drove home. Ashley was on the couch, watching TV, phone in her hand, smiling at the screen. She looked up when I walked in. "Hey, where'd you go?" "My dad's. He needed help with a hinge." She nodded, went back to her phone, and I stood there in the doorway of my own house, looking at a woman I'd loved for 8 years and married for 7, and I thought, I'm going to find out who Alexis 2 is. And when I do, nothing in this room will ever look the same again. I was right about that, but I was wrong about how bad it would be. It was going to be so much worse. I didn't sleep that night, or the next night, or the one after that. What I did instead was research, and I want to explain something about the way I did it because I think it matters. I didn't tear through the house looking for evidence. I didn't grab her phone when she was in the shower and try every passcode I could think of. I didn't go through her purse or read her mail or do any of the things that movies show betrayed husbands doing in some frantic, tearful montage. I was systematic. I was quiet. I was cold. And I'm not sure that's something to be proud of, because looking back, the coldness frightened me more than the anger. Anger means you still care. Coldness means something inside you has already started to shut down, the way a body shuts down its extremities in hypothermia, pulling the blood inward to protect the vital organs. My vital organs, in this case, were my sanity and my ability to go to work every morning and put wrenches on bolts without my hands shaking. Tuesday night, 4:47 a.m. Ashley was asleep. I was at the kitchen table with my laptop. The coffee maker's auto brew was still 20 minutes from kicking in, and the house was silent in that specific way. A house is silent before dawn, when even the refrigerator seems to be holding its breath. I logged into our T-Mobile account. Shared plan, 2 lines. I'd set it up 3 years ago and I paid the bill, which meant I had the login credentials, which meant I had access to the call and text records for both lines. Ashley either didn't know this or didn't think I'd ever look. Both possibilities said the same thing about how much she thought about me. I pulled up her line. Last 30 days. 814 text messages to and from a single number. I stared at that number for a long time, not the phone number. The count, 814. I did the math the way I do math on repair estimates automatically without thinking. 814 divided by 30 days, that's roughly 27 texts per day. 27 times a day, my wife was in communication with someone who wasn't me, while she was at work, while she was making dinner, while she was lying next to me in bed at 2 in the morning, reaching under the pillow where she'd started keeping her phone. The phone number itself meant nothing to me, just digits. I wrote it down on the back of an envelope because I didn't trust technology as much as I trusted a pen and paper. Then I opened a browser and went to one of those reverse phone lookup sites. The free ones that give you a name but make you pay for the full report. I didn't need the full report. I just needed the name. The search took 8 seconds. A loading bar, a spinning wheel. The kind of mundane digital machinery that has no idea what it's about to deliver. The name that came back was Mark Brewer. I didn't know who Mark Brewer was. The name meant nothing. It could have been anyone, a coworker, an old friend, a cousin I'd never met. I sat there in my dark kitchen at 5 in the morning, staring at a stranger's name on a laptop screen, and I felt the specific emptiness of having an answer that only creates more questions. The coffee maker clicked on. It started its gurgling cycle, the same sound it made every morning, the sound of routine, of normalcy, of a house that was still pretending to function. I listened to it brew while the name Mark Brewer glowed on my screen like a wound. I needed more, and I knew where to get it. The next day, Wednesday, I did something during my lunch break that I'm not proud of. I drove to the Lowe's on Loop 1604, the one near the Starbucks where Blake had seen Ashley's car, the one that was 20 minutes from her office in the wrong direction. I didn't go inside. I parked across the street at a taco cabana, backed into a spot facing the Lowe's entrance, and I waited. I ordered a bean and cheese taco from the drive-thru window, not because I was hungry, but because a man sitting alone in a parking lot looks suspicious, and a man eating a taco looks normal. San Antonio logic. At 12:43 p.m., Ashley's silver Honda Civic pulled into the Lowe's parking lot. My hand tightened around the taco. I watched her park. 3rd row near the side entrance, not the main entrance where the customers go. The side entrance where the employees take their breaks. She knew the layout. She'd been here before, many times. At 12:47, a man walked out the side entrance. Blue Lowe's vest. Khaki pants, average height, dark hair. He walked with a particular kind of confidence that I recognized immediately because I'd seen it in every guy who peaked in high school and spent the rest of his life trying to recreate the feeling. The walk of a man who thinks he's more important than his circumstances. He got into the passenger side of Ashley's car. They sat there, 15 minutes. From 200 yards away, through the windshield of my truck and across 4 lanes of a parking lot, I couldn't see details. I didn't need to. I could see shapes. Two shapes close together in the front seat of a car that I had maintained with my own hands, in a parking lot of a store where this man apparently worked, in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon while I was supposed to be eating lunch and getting back to work. I took a bite of the taco. I couldn't taste it. It could have been cardboard. It could have been nothing. My taste buds had shut down along with everything else. The man got out at 1:02. He leaned back through the open door and said something. I could see Ashley laugh. Then he closed the door and walked back toward the side entrance, adjusting his vest, running a hand through his hair. Casual, easy, like a man leaving his own car. Ashley sat in the Civic for another minute. I watched her pull down the visor mirror. She checked her face. She adjusted her hair. She wiped something from the corner of her mouth. These are the gestures of a woman who has just done something she needs to erase the evidence of before she returns to her life. I'd seen her make those same mirror adjustments before, after arguments, after crying in the car. They were the movements of someone putting a mask back on. She drove away. I sat there with a half-eaten taco and a feeling in my chest like someone had reached in and rearranged my organs. That night I looked up Mark Brewer on Facebook. It was easy, public profile. This man had no privacy settings, which told me everything about his intelligence and nothing about his character that I didn't already suspect. His cover photo was a fishing trip. His profile picture was a selfie, the kind where a man holds the phone slightly above his face because he thinks it makes his jawline look better. Married. Wife, Sarah Brewer, née Montoya, together 15 years. I scrolled through his page with the grim patience of a man reading a medical report. Family barbecue photos, him standing next to a grill with a beer gut pushing against his shirt, grinning. A Valentine's Day post from February, 15 years with this woman and she's still my rock, love you babe. The post had 23 likes. Sarah had commented a heart emoji, my rock. He called his wife his rock on Facebook in February and was sitting in my wife's car in October. The math on that is 7 months, give or take. 7 months of posting love songs for his wife on social media while sliding into someone else's passenger seat during his lunch break. I kept scrolling. More photos, birthdays, holidays, a Thanksgiving table. In every photo, Mark Brewer looked exactly like what he was, a man playing a role, smiling the right smile, standing in the right place, holding the right beer. A man whose entire public life was a set design for a show that had no audience but served its purpose, which was to make everything look normal. I took screenshots. I saved them to a folder on my phone. I was building something without knowing what it would become. A case, maybe, a weapon, evidence. It felt like filling sandbags before a flood, not knowing if the levee would hold, just knowing that standing there doing nothing was not an option. But here's the thing that surprised me. Looking at Sarah Brewer's face in those photos, I didn't just feel anger. I felt something else. Something unexpected and uncomfortable. I felt a kinship. This woman who I'd never met, who lived across the city, who went to work every day and came home every night to the same man who was in my wife's car, she was living inside the same lie I was. She was eating dinner across from the same kind of liar. She was lying in bed next to the same kind of absence. We were strangers sharing the same disease. I closed the laptop. I went to bed. I lay in the dark and counted the ceiling fan rotations and thought about Sarah Brewer's face in those photos and wondered if she knew, if she suspected. If she was lying in her own dark bedroom right now, staring at her own ceiling fan, listening for phones that shouldn't buzz at 2 in the morning. Thursday. I made a phone call that changed everything. Not a dramatic phone call, not a confrontation, something quieter and in its own way more devastating. I called Alexis Herrera. I kept my voice casual, friendly, the voice of a man who has absolutely no suspicions and is calling about something mundane. Hey, Alexis, it's Adrian, quick thing. Ashley left her gym bag at home this morning and she's not answering her phone. Do you know which gym she's been going to? I wanted to drop it off. Silence. 3 seconds of dead air. If you've never waited through 3 seconds of silence from someone who should have an immediate answer to a simple question, let me tell you, those 3 seconds contain multitudes. In those 3 seconds, I could hear Alexis's brain cycling through options. What do I say? What does he know? What has Ashley told me to say? How do I cover for her without sounding like I'm covering? Oh, A swallow. I could hear her swallow. I think she switched gyms, maybe the one on Bandera. I'm not totally sure. There is no gym on Bandera Road that Ashley has ever mentioned, ever visited, or ever had any reason to visit. Alexis was inventing a gym in real time, pulling a street name out of the air because she'd been caught off guard and needed to say something. Okay, thanks, Alexis, I'll figure it out. Yeah, no problem. Tell her I said hi. I hung up. I sat in my truck in the Midas parking lot with the engine off and the windows down and the October heat pressing in, and I absorbed what had just happened. Alexis knew. She'd known for a while. She knew about the affair, and she knew there was no gym, and she'd been covering for Ashley, and every time she'd sat across from me at a dinner or a birthday or a casual Sunday evening with drinks, she'd looked me in the face and lied by omission. Every girl's night was a cover story. Every time Ashley said she was at Alexis's place, Alexis was the alibi. The infrastructure of the deception wasn't just Ashley. It was a system, a network, people who knew and chose silence because silence was easier than the explosion that truth would cause. The betrayal doubled. It more than doubled, because now it wasn't just my wife. It was the fabric of my social life. The cookouts, the birthdays, the casual conversations, all of it contaminated. All of it built on a foundation that other people had helped keep standing. That evening I drove home with a speech in my head. I'd been writing it for hours. In the truck, in the shop bathroom, on the lift between cars, a speech for Ashley. The words were clean and sharp. I'd ask her who Mark Brewer was. I'd watch her face. I'd see the exact moment the mask cracked, and I would know finally and completely, and then we'd be on the other side of this, one way or another, in the territory of truth where at least the air was breathable even if it burned. I walked through the front door, and the speech died in my throat. Ashley's sister had dropped off their 5-year-old niece, Sophia. The little girl was on the couch with Ashley, and they were watching a cartoon, something with a princess and a talking animal, and Sophia's hair was half braided, and Ashley was working on the other half with careful fingers, the way she always did with Sophia's hair, patient and gentle and present in a way that reminded me of the woman I married. Ashley looked up at me and smiled. A real smile. Not the practiced one, the real one with the crooked bottom teeth, the one that has no agenda, the one that just means I'm happy you're here. Uncle Adrian? Sophia jumped off the couch and ran to me with the particular velocity of a 5-year-old whose favorite person just walked through the door. I picked her up. She weighed nothing. She smelled like Johnson's baby shampoo and grape popsicle. She said, "Come watch with us. The princess is going to save the horse." I sat on the couch. Sophia settled between us, Ashley on one side, me on the other, this small person who had no idea she'd just defused a bomb by existing. Ashley went back to braiding. She caught my eye over Sophia's head and made a face that said, "Can you believe how cute this kid is?" And I made a face back that said, "I know," and for a moment, one terrible moment, we were us again. The original us. The us that worked. I watched the cartoon. I didn't see a single frame of it. I was watching Ashley's hands move through Sophia's hair, gentle and steady, the same hands that held a phone face down on the counter, the same hands that texted a man named Mark Brewer 27 times a day, the same hands that reached for me in the dark while I flinched away. The same hands. That was the night I understood something crucial. Something that changed the way I handled everything that came after. The truth doesn't just destroy the guilty, it detonates. And everyone standing nearby, everyone in the blast radius catches shrapnel. Sophia, Ashley's sister, my father, friends who'd have to choose sides, co-workers who'd have to pretend they didn't know. The truth is not a scalpel, it's a grenade. And if I was going to pull the pin, I needed to make sure I was aiming it, not just throwing it. I needed to be surgical, not explosive, so I said nothing. I ate the leftover fajitas Ashley heated up for me. I helped put Sophia to bed in the guest room when her sister called to say she was running late. I kissed the top of Sophia's head and smelled her grape popsicle hair and closed the door gently. And I went to the garage. I sat in my truck. I opened my phone and looked at the folder I'd been building, the credit card screenshots, the phone records, the Facebook profile of Mark Brewer. The name Alexis 2 burned into my memory. I was going to find out everything. And I was going to do it quietly, carefully, the way I diagnose a car problem. You don't hear a knock in the engine and start ripping parts out. You run diagnostics, you narrow it down, you find the exact source of the failure, and then you decide, fix it or total it. I wasn't ready to decide yet, but I was done standing still. 2 weeks, that's how long I carried it. 2 weeks of going to work and changing oil and rotating tires and smiling at customers, and telling them their brake pads had another 6 months, and their transmission fluid looked fine, and yes, we can do an alignment, bring it in Tuesday. 2 weeks of coming home and eating dinner and watching television and lying in bed 3 feet from a woman who was in love with someone else and pretending that the cold stone in my stomach wasn't growing heavier every day. I lost 11 pounds, not on purpose, not from some dramatic refusal to eat. I just forgot. Food stopped tasting like anything. My body was running on coffee and adrenaline and the low hum of controlled fury that had replaced my heartbeat. Blake noticed. He didn't say anything, but he started bringing me an extra breakfast taco every morning, just left it on my toolbox without a word. That's how men take care of each other. No speeches, no hugs, just an extra taco on a toolbox. My father noticed too. He called me on a Wednesday night, which he never did. Antonio Vega did not make phone calls. He showed up. He fixed things. He sat on porches. Phone calls were for emergencies and bad news, which in his mind were the same thing. He called and said, "You eating?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Come for breakfast Saturday. I'm making migas." That was it. That was his version of "I'm worried about you," which is the same as "I love you," which is the same as "everything is going to be okay." But he would never say any of those things because he is Antonio Vega and he speaks in migas and screen door hinges and showing up. 2 weeks of holding a grenade with the pin still in, waiting. For what? I didn't know. For the right moment. For enough courage. For something to push me past the point of no return. It came on a Wednesday, 6:47 p.m. I was sitting in my truck in the Midas parking lot. The shop was closed. Everyone else had left. I was just sitting there the way I'd started sitting in parking lots, alone with my phone and my thoughts because going home meant performing and I was running out of performance. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I opened the message. Then another came. Then another. Photos. I need to be careful about how I describe this because some things deserve precision and some things deserve mercy, and this was both. The photos were of Ashley, in a room I didn't recognize, a motel room from the look of the bedspread and the generic art on the wall. She was with Mark Brewer. They were not clothed. The images were explicit, deliberate, and staged with the specific intention of causing maximum damage to the person viewing them. Mark was visible in 2 of the photos. In one of them, he was looking directly at the camera, smiling, not a grin, not a smirk, a smile. The confident, relaxed smile of a man who was enjoying not just the act but the performance of the act, who was not just sleeping with my wife but documenting it, curating it, preparing it for an audience. An audience of one. Me. Then the text came through. "Hey, Adrian, just thought you should know your wife loves being with me. She says I make her feel things you never could. She's better with me in every way." I read it 3 times. The first time the words didn't register. They were just shapes on a screen. The second time they registered and something inside my chest imploded, a physical sensation like a fist closing around my lungs. The third time something else happened. Something cold and quiet and infinitely more dangerous than anger. But before the cold came, there was the heat. I dropped the phone. My hands were shaking so badly it slipped out of my fingers and fell into the footwell of the truck. I reached down to get it, and my fingers felt like someone else's, thick and clumsy and disconnected from my brain. The Texas sun was setting outside the windshield, throwing long bars of orange light across the empty parking lot, across the cracked asphalt, across the Midas sign that flickered slightly because no one had fixed the wiring and we were all too tired to care. I hit the steering wheel. Open palm. Hard. Then again. Then with my fist once, twice, 3 times, until the horn blared loud enough to echo off the buildings across the street, and my knuckles split open against the hard plastic. Blood on the steering wheel. The pain was good. The pain was something I could feel, something that had a source and a location, unlike the other pain, the one that was everywhere and nowhere and didn't have a name. I screamed, not a word, not his name or her name or anything that language could contain. Just sound. Raw, guttural, animal sound. The kind of noise that comes from below the basement of your personality, from the place where you keep the things you don't show anyone. It came out of me like something being expelled, like vomiting, like my body was trying to physically remove the images from my brain through sheer force. Then silence. I sat in my truck with bleeding knuckles and a horn echo dying across the parking lot, and I breathed. In and out. In and out. The way you breathe when you're trying not to do something you'll spend the rest of your life regretting. I don't know how long I sat there. 45 minutes. Maybe an hour. The sun finished setting. The parking lot went from orange to gray to dark. I sat in the dark in my truck, holding my phone in my bloody hand with pictures of my wife and another man on the screen. That's when Blake showed up. He'd forgotten his jacket inside. He'd driven halfway home and turned back for it because it was the jacket with his cousin's apartment key in the pocket. And without that key, he was sleeping in his car, and his car was a 2004 Civic with a broken heater. He walked out of the Midas side door, saw my truck still in the lot, and stopped. He could see me through the windshield. He could see that something was wrong the way mechanics see things, in the posture, in the stillness, in the way a man sits when the structural integrity has failed. He didn't knock on the window. He didn't ask what happened. He walked around to the passenger side, opened the door, and got in. He sat there, in the dark, in the silence, next to me. 5 minutes passed. Maybe 10, I don't know, time had stopped meaning anything. I handed him the phone. Blake looked at the screen, his face changed. I watched it happen in the dim glow of the phone, a transformation that took about 3 seconds and moved through stages like a chemical reaction. Confusion, recognition, disgust, and then something harder. Something that settled over his features like a door being bolted shut. He scrolled once, that's all, one scroll through the photos. Then he handed the phone back, placing it carefully in my hand the way you hand someone a loaded weapon. "This guy sent this to you?" His voice was flat. "On purpose." I nodded. "He wanted you to see this." "Yes." Blake stared at the dashboard. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Listen to me. This isn't just cheating. I need you to hear me. This right here, what this guy did, this is a man trying to break you. He wants you to drive to his house right now. He wants you to kick in his door and put your hands on him so you end up in county and he's the victim and your wife has a reason to leave. That's the play. He's daring you." "Do you understand?" I understood. In the clear, frozen part of my brain that was still operational, I understood perfectly. Mark Brewer didn't send those photos because he was careless or drunk or impulsive. He sent them because he was strategic, because he was insecure, because somewhere in the pathetic architecture of his ego, he needed me to know. He needed me to react. He needed the chaos because chaos was the environment where men like him thrived and men like me made mistakes. A violent reaction would give him everything. I'd be the unhinged husband. He'd be the man who was just in the wrong place. Ashley would be the victim caught between two volatile men. The whole narrative would flip. I'd lose the moral high ground. I'd lose my freedom if I put my hands on him. I'd lose, and I was done losing. "I'm not going to his house," I said. Blake looked at me. "Good. I'm going to do something worse." He didn't ask what. Maybe he already knew. Maybe he didn't want to know. We sat in the dark for another few minutes. Then Blake said, "Your hand's bleeding," and I said, "Yeah," and he said, "You should wrap that before it stains your seat," and I said, "It's already stained," and he nodded. He got out. He got his jacket. He drove away. I drove home. Ashley was already asleep. The house was dark and quiet and ordinary. I didn't go to bed. I went to the back porch, the one that overlooks the small backyard with its patchy grass and the rusted barbecue grill I'd been meaning to fix for 2 years, and the chain-link fence that separated our yard from the neighbors. I sat in the plastic lawn chair that creaked under my weight because one leg was slightly shorter than the others. I opened my phone. I looked at Mark Brewer's Facebook page again. Sarah Brewer, née Montoya, 15 years, his rock. I'd looked at this page before, but now I looked differently. Now I wasn't looking at his page, I was looking at hers. I found Sarah's LinkedIn through a Google search, professional headshot, clean, no nonsense. Her current position, paralegal, Aldridge Family Law. I stared at those 4 words. Paralegal, family law. I looked up the firm. Samantha Aldridge, attorney at law, small office near the Bexar County Courthouse. Family law, divorce, custody, asset division, 5-star reviews on Google. I read them. She fought for me when no one else would. Ruthless but fair. My ex-husband's lawyer couldn't keep up. She got me everything. My brain, which had been operating in survival mode for 2 weeks, suddenly clicked into a different gear. Not emotional, mechanical. The diagnostic mode I use when a car comes in with a problem no one can figure out and the customer is frustrated and the other mechanics have given up. That mode. The mode where you step back and stop looking at the symptoms and start looking at the system. Mark Brewer's wife was a paralegal at a divorce law firm. She didn't just know about divorce. She researched divorce cases for a living. She spent her days gathering financial records, building evidence files, documenting infidelity and asset concealment, and all the ways a marriage could be weaponized in a courtroom. She was not a woman who would hear about her husband's affair and cry into a pillow. She was a woman who would hear about her husband's affair and open a file. And Mark Brewer, in his infinite arrogance, had just handed me the evidence. Not handed me, delivered it, gift-wrapped it, sent it directly to my phone with a smile and a taunt. I sat on the porch and smoked the last cigarette from the emergency pack, the one I'd opened 2 weeks ago in the truck, the night of the 2 a.m. buzzing. The pack was almost empty now, 5 cigarettes in 2 weeks, each one a marker of how far I'd fallen from the man who quit 3 years ago and thought he'd never go back. I tipped my head back and blew smoke at the San Antonio sky. No stars. Too much light pollution. Just a flat, dark ceiling above a city of 1 million people, most of them asleep, most of them trusting the person beside them, most of them with no idea how quickly that trust could be turned into a weapon and fired back at them. Inside, Ashley was sleeping. Peacefully. The sleep of a woman who believed her secrets were safe, her systems intact, her lies holding. Somewhere across the city, Mark Brewer was sleeping too, probably pleased with himself. Probably imagining me on his doorstep, fists up, playing the part he'd written for me. The angry husband, the violent cliché, the man who makes it easy for everyone else to play the victim. But I wasn't coming to his door. I opened my phone. I saved every photo, every text, every message to a cloud folder. I made a backup. I sent copies to an email address I'd created that morning, a fresh Gmail that Ashley didn't know about. I organized everything chronologically. Dates, times, evidence. Then I opened a new message. I typed Sarah Brewer's name into the search bar on Facebook. I found her profile. I drafted a message. I wrote it and deleted it, wrote it again, deleted it again. 5 times I rewrote that message, each version different, each version wrong. Too angry, too desperate, too pathetic, too cold. I needed it to be right because this was the first domino, and if I tipped it wrong, everything would scatter instead of falling in a line. The final version was simple. It said who I was. It said what I'd found. It said I believed she deserved to know. It did not beg. It did not rage. It was written the way I write a diagnostic report for a customer when the news is bad. Here's what I found. Here's the evidence. Here's what it means. I'm sorry. I didn't send it. Not yet. I saved it as a draft because the message wasn't the weapon. The message was just the trigger, and I needed to make sure the weapon was built first. I sat on the porch until the sky started to lighten in the east, that first thin line of gray that separates night from morning. Ashley's alarm would go off in an hour. She'd shower. She'd make coffee. She'd kiss me on the cheek and go to work, and she'd text Mark Brewer from the parking lot of the dental office, and he'd text her back, and the day would proceed as if the ground beneath all of us wasn't already cracked. But I knew something now that I hadn't known 2 weeks ago. Something that the rage and the pain and the shaking hands and the bloodied knuckles had distilled into a single, clear thought. People think revenge is fire. They think it's hot. They think it's the thing you do when your blood is boiling and your vision is red and you can't think straight. They think it's punching the steering wheel. They think it's driving to the man's house. They think it's screaming in a parking lot. It's not. That's not revenge. That's reaction. That's the animal brain. That's what they want you to do. Revenge. Real revenge. The kind that actually works. The kind that actually hurts. The kind that disassembles a man's life bolt by bolt the way you disassemble an engine carefully, thoroughly, with the right tools and the right sequence. That's ICE. That's 4 a.m. on a porch in San Antonio with a cigarette and a plan and the patience to execute it. That's looking at a picture of a man smiling in your wife's bed and thinking not I'm going to kill him, but I'm going to let his wife do it for me. I finished the cigarette. I went inside. I washed the blood off my knuckles at the kitchen sink. The brake fluid smell was still there under the soap, under the blood embedded in the skin. Some things don't wash off. Some things live in you. I dried my hands. I went to bed. I lay down next to Ashley, and she stirred in her sleep and murmured something I couldn't hear and pressed her back against my side, the way she'd done every night for 7 years, an unconscious seeking of warmth that her body still performed even though her heart had moved elsewhere. I stared at the ceiling fan. I counted the rotations. And for the first time in 2 weeks, I felt something other than pain. I felt ready. 3 days I sat on that draft message. 3 days of going to work, sliding under cars, torquing bolts, collecting tickets, smiling at customers, telling them their alignment was off by 2 degrees and they needed new tie rods. 3 days of driving home to a woman who was sleeping with another man and cooking me dinner like nothing was wrong. 3 days of the most disciplined silence I've ever maintained in my life. I didn't send the message to Sarah Brewer because I wasn't ready. Not emotionally. Strategically. There's a difference between throwing a punch and landing one, and I'd spent too many hours in that parking lot with bloody knuckles to confuse the two again. On the 4th day, I called Aldridge Family Law. I'd like to schedule a consultation. Family matter. The receptionist asked for my name and availability. I gave both. She said they had an opening at noon the next day. I said that worked. She asked how I'd heard about them. Google, I said, which was technically true. I'd found them through a dead man's LinkedIn profile, but Google sounded less insane. I showed up the next day on my lunch break, still in my Midas uniform. Dark blue polo with the logo on the chest, work boots, grease under my fingernails that no amount of scrubbing would remove. The orange pumice soap gets the top layer, but the creases of your knuckles hold everything. Every car you've ever touched lives in your hands. The office was in a strip mall near the Bixar County Courthouse, between a tax preparer and a place that sold custom phone cases. Nothing fancy. A glass door with gold lettering. A waiting room with 4 chairs, a fake plant, and magazines nobody reads. And behind the reception desk, filing documents with the efficient, practiced motions of someone who'd been doing this for years, was Sarah Brewer. I recognized her from Facebook. Older in person, more angular. She had the kind of face that was probably soft once, maybe 15 years ago, before whatever her marriage had done to her carved it into something harder. Dark hair pulled back tight. Reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. A wedding ring on her left hand that she touched unconsciously, rotating it with her thumb the way people fidget with things they're thinking about getting rid of. She looked up, professional smile. Mr. Delgado, that's me. Ms. Aldridge will be with you in just a few minutes. Can I get you some water? I'm good, thanks. I sat down. The chair creaked. I was aware of how I looked in this office. Grease-stained hands, work boots leaving faint prints on the tile, a man who fixed cars for a living, sitting in a place designed for people whose lives were breaking down. I suppose I fit right in. Through the glass partition, I watched Sarah work. She was on the phone now, speaking in a low, measured tone, taking notes. Her handwriting was small and precise. She moved through tasks the way I moved through a break job. Systematic, no wasted motion. A woman who had turned competence into armor. Her wedding ring caught the fluorescent light every time she wrote. I thought about Mark Brewer scrolling through Facebook, posting fishing trip photos and calling this woman my rock while texting my wife 27 times a day. I thought about what Sarah's mornings must look like, whether she made him breakfast, whether she kissed him goodbye, whether she lay in bed at night counting ceiling fan rotations, listening for phones that buzzed at 2 a.m. Mr. Delgado, a door had opened. A woman stood in the hallway, tall, mid-40s in a blazer that was professional but not flashy. Hair cut short, no jewelry except a watch. She had the look of someone who'd heard every sad story in San Antonio and had stopped being surprised by any of them. Samantha Aldridge, come on back. Her office was small. Desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, a framed law degree from St. Mary's University. No family photos. A single window that looked out at the parking lot. She gestured to a chair and sat behind her desk and folded her hands and looked at me with the patient, unblinking attention of a woman who charged by the hour and didn't waste a second of it. Tell me what's going on. So I did. Broad strokes. Wife of 7 years, evidence of an affair, I had documentation, I wasn't sure what my options were. Samantha didn't react, didn't lean forward or raise her eyebrows or say, I'm so sorry. She just listened the way a doctor listens to symptoms. When I finished, she asked questions. How are your finances structured? Joint checking, joint savings, both our names on the house. Who makes more? I do, not by much. Any children? No. Does your wife have any evidence of wrongdoing on your part, affairs, substance abuse, financial misconduct? No. Are you certain? I change oil for a living and come home every night. I'm not exactly living a double life, the ghost of a smile. You'd be surprised, Mr. Delgado, but I'll take your word for it. She made a note. Texas is a no-fault divorce state. That means infidelity alone isn't grounds for a lopsided settlement. However, she looked up, if you can demonstrate that marital funds were diverted to support the affair, hotel rooms, gifts, meals, secret credit cards, that changes the equation. The court can consider fault when dividing property. She opened a credit card I didn't know about. And there are cash withdrawals from our savings. Samantha's pen stopped. How much? About $600 from savings. The credit card balance is $1,400. Do you have documentation? Screenshots, bank statements? Good, get me everything, dates, amounts, account numbers, and start separating your finances. Quietly, don't tip her off. Open a new account at a different institution, redirect your direct deposit, and keep a token amount flowing into the joint account so she doesn't notice the change. She leaned back. One more thing, you mentioned the affair partner sent you explicit material, unsolicited, photos and texts taunting me. Did you save them? Everything. If this man intentionally sent you sexually explicit images of your wife for the purpose of causing emotional distress, that opens additional avenues. Depending on how this was done, there may be both civil and criminal exposure for the sender. She paused. I'm going to ask you a direct question and I need a direct answer. What do you want from this? I thought about it. Not long. I've been thinking about it for 3 days. I want out clean, I want the house, and I want this to be done right so that when it's over, nobody can say I didn't give her a fair chance to keep what was hers. A fair chance for someone who stole from your joint savings to fund an affair. Fair doesn't mean they deserve it. It means I can sleep at night. Another ghost of a smile. I can work with that. Consultation fee is $150. I'll bill you separately so it doesn't show up on any shared accounts. Come back when you have the full documentation package. I stood. We shook hands. Hers was dry and firm, a handshake that had ended marriages. On my way out, I passed through the reception area. Sarah was at her desk finishing a call. She hung up and looked at me. Did you find the consultation helpful? Very. Good, that's what we're here for. Standard line, professional courtesy. But she held eye contact a beat longer than necessary, the way people do when they're reading something in your face that you haven't said yet. I should have walked out. I should have nodded and left and kept my mouth shut. But something in the fluorescent light of that strip mall office, something about seeing her wedding ring and knowing what I knew about the man who'd put it there, made me stop. Can I ask you something personal? She blinked, surprised, but she didn't say no. Depends on the question. How long have you been married? A pause, brief. The kind that registers more in the eyes than anywhere else. 15 years, I nodded. I hope you never have to sit in that chair in there. The words came out softer than I intended. I don't know what my face looked like. I don't know what she read in it, but something shifted in her expression, not suspicion, not alarm, something closer to recognition. The way you notice someone walking with a limp and you think they know what a bad knee feels like. Thank you, she said quietly. I left. The parking lot was bright and hot and smelled like asphalt and exhaust. I got in my truck and drove back to Midas and finished my shift and said nothing to Blake about where I'd been. But a seed was in the ground. I hadn't even planned to plant it. That evening, I started the financial audit Samantha had recommended. Ashley was at her gym. I had the house to myself. I sat at the kitchen table with the laptop and our bank's website and a legal pad and a pen, and I went through 3 months of statements line by line. The $600 from savings was worse than I'd thought. It wasn't $600. It was closer to $800 because I'd missed some smaller withdrawals. 20 here, 35 there. Amounts so small they vanished into the noise of daily spending. She'd been careful, not genius-level careful, but careful enough that a husband who trusted her would never notice. I noticed now. I also found the separate credit card. I couldn't access the statements, but I could see the account listed on our credit report, which I pulled for free from one of those annual report sites. Opened 4 months ago. Balance, $1,400, $4 months. That meant she'd opened it right around the time the affair started if my timeline was right. She'd created a financial escape hatch at the same moment she'd started building a second life. That's not impulsive. That's planning. That's a woman who knew exactly what she was doing, who made a choice and then made 20 smaller choices to support it, each one a brick in a wall between the person she was pretending to be and the person she'd become. I documented everything. Dates, amounts, screenshots. I put it all in the folder on the thumb drive that was becoming the most important object in my life. A small piece of plastic and metal, no bigger than my thumb, that contained the complete autopsy of my marriage. Meanwhile, Blake was doing recon. I hadn't asked him to. That's not how Blake operates. You don't ask Blake for help. Blake decides you need help and then shows up with information the way other people show up with a six-pack. Unannounced and exactly what you needed. He'd gone to the Lowe's on Loop 1604. Not to confront anyone, just to browse, pick up some WD-40, chat with the guys in hardware. Blake could talk to anyone. He had that gift, that easy, open-faced warmth that made strangers trust him within minutes. Mechanics develop it because half the job is convincing nervous customers that you're not going to rip them off. He called me that night from his cousin's couch. So I swung by the Lowe's. Blake, just browsing, man, needed some sandpaper. Anyway, your boy Mark has a reputation. What kind of reputation? The kind where every woman in the store knows to avoid the break room when he's in it. I talked to a kid in lumber. He said Mark got written up about 6 months ago for being inappropriate with a female employee. Girl named Jessica. She shut it down hard, but HR didn't do anything. Slap on the wrist. I filed the name. Jessica, Lowe's employee, written up for harassment. What else? He drives a truck he definitely can't afford on an assistant manager's salary. And get this, he leases an apartment. Separate from where he lives with his wife. An apartment. A one-bedroom off Wurzbach. His coworkers know about it. He told them his marriage is basically over and he needs his own space. But he still goes home to his wife every night. Blake paused. This guy's been building a story, Adrian. He's been telling everyone who will listen that his marriage is dead so that when the affair comes out, it looks like he was already 1 foot out the door. He's controlling the narrative before there's a narrative to control. Smart. Not that smart. He sent you photos. That's the dumbest thing a man can do in this situation, and he did it because he's not smart. He's cocky. There's a big difference. He was right. Mark Brewer wasn't a mastermind. He was an insecure man with good instincts and no impulse control, which is the most dangerous combination in any animal. Smart enough to build a cover story. Too reckless to see the trap he was building for himself. I thanked Blake. He said, "Don't thank me, just don't do anything stupid." I said good night. I hung up and sat in the dark kitchen and added Blake's intel to the file in my head. The apartment, the write-up, the narrative construction, Jessica, every detail was another bolt in the machine I was building. And the machine was almost ready. The next week, I did what mechanics do. I organized. If you've ever brought your car to a shop with a noise you can't explain, some rattle or hum or knock that only happens on Tuesdays when you're going uphill with the AC on, you know the process. The mechanic doesn't guess. He doesn't just pop the hood and start replacing parts. He runs diagnostics. He hooks up the scanner. He test drives. He isolates variables until the noise becomes a number, and the number becomes a part, and the part becomes a fix. That's what I did with my marriage. I took the rattle and turned it into data. Monday through Friday, after Ashley went asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and built the evidence file. Phone records from T-Mobile. 814 texts in 30 days to Mark Brewer's number, plus 47 calls averaging 11 minutes each. Credit card statements showing the phantom lunches, the bar charge on the night she claimed to be at Alexis's apartment, and 3 charges at a motel on Broadway that I'd initially missed because they were listed under a corporate name I didn't recognize. Bank records documenting $814 in unexplained cash withdrawals. The secret credit card with its $1,400 balance. Screenshots of the Alexis 2 text notification. And of course, the photos and messages Mark Brewer had so generously delivered to my phone. I put everything on a thumb drive. I made a backup and locked it in my toolbox at Midas, behind the socket wrenches, where nobody would ever look because nobody borrows socket wrenches without asking. The process took 5 nights. Each night, After Ashley's breathing deepened into sleep, I slipped out of bed and went to the kitchen and worked in the blue glow of the laptop screen. I felt like a surgeon prepping for an operation that would either save the patient or kill them. In this case, the patient was my life, and I still wasn't sure which outcome I was aiming for. On Friday, I went back to Samantha Aldridge's office. This time, I brought the thumb drive. Samantha plugged it into her laptop and spent 20 minutes reviewing the contents while I sat across from her and listened to the clock on the wall tick in a room that smelled like coffee and paper and the particular staleness of an office that deals in other people's misery 5 days a week. She didn't speak while she reviewed. She clicked through files. Occasionally, she'd make a small sound, a hum or a hem that could have meant anything. When she got to the photos and messages from Mark, she paused, not long, a professional pause, then she kept going. When she finished, she closed the laptop and looked at me. "You've been thorough. I'm a mechanic, it's what we do. In my experience, most clients bring me a feeling, you brought me a case." She folded her hands. "Here's where you stand. The phone records establish a pattern. The financial records establish diversion of marital assets. The text messages and photos from the affair partner establish intentional infliction of emotional distress, which is a separate claim you could pursue civilly if you chose to. Combined, this gives you strong grounds for an unequal property division." "What does that mean in English?" "It means you get the house." I let that sit for a second, the house. The 2-bedroom on the west side with the patchy yard and the rusted grill. It wasn't much by anyone's standard, but it was what I'd earned. What I'd put together on a mechanic's salary over 7 years of 10-hour shifts and bad knee mornings. It was mine. "One more thing," Samantha said. "The photos this man sent you, the taunting messages. In Texas, distributing intimate images without the subject's consent is a criminal offense. Your wife is the subject of those photos. Whether she knew they were being taken and sent is a question that could expose Mr. Brewer to criminal charges. I don't want him in jail. I want him to lose. Those aren't mutually exclusive. But I understand. For now, my recommendation is this: do not file yet. Separate your finances first. The more quietly you prepare, the less she can counter when the papers hit. Timing matters, Mr. Delgado. In divorce, timing is everything." "How long?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. Get your direct deposit moved, your savings separated, and your documentation buttoned up. Then we file. "And when we file with everything." I nodded. I paid the consultation fee in cash this time, bills I'd pulled from an ATM on a street Ashley never drove down, using a debit card from the new credit union account I'd opened 3 days earlier. Samantha gave me a receipt. I folded it into my wallet behind my Midas employee ID, where no one would see it. That Sunday, I told my father everything. I drove to his house in the late afternoon. The light was golden, that particular San Antonio autumn light that makes even the cracked sidewalks and chain-link fences look almost beautiful. Antonio was on the porch, fixing a faucet this time. A kitchen faucet, disassembled on a towel on the porch railing, washers and O-rings laid out in order. I sat on the step. He didn't look up. We existed in the silence for a while, then I started talking, not fast, not in a flood. Slowly, the way oil drains from an engine. I told him about the phone, about the gym that wasn't a gym, about Alexis too, about the credit card statements and the phone records and Mark Brewer and the photos and the texts, about Samantha Aldridge, about the thumb drive, about the plan I was building that I still couldn't entirely see the shape of. Antonio listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't gasp or curse or shake his head. He just listened while his hands worked on the faucet, steady and sure, replacing the washer with the same quiet precision he'd applied to everything in his life for 58 years. When I finished, the faucet was reassembled. Antonio set it on the railing and wiped his hands on the towel. He opened 2 beers from the cooler he kept on the porch, handed me one, took a long drink of his. Then he asked me a question I wasn't expecting. "What do you want to happen after?" Not during. After. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. Because I realized, sitting there with a beer in my hand and the golden light fading, that I hadn't thought about it. Not once. I'd thought about the filing, the evidence, the confrontation, the look on Mark Brewer's face when his world collapsed, but I hadn't thought about what came after, what the house would feel like empty. What mornings would look like without another person's coffee mug in the sink, what I would be when I was no longer a husband. I don't know, I said. Antonio nodded, like that was an acceptable answer, maybe the only honest one. Your mother, he said. Then he stopped, took another drink, started again. Your mother, God rest her, she used to say that revenge is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. I know that saying, Pop. She also said something else. She said sometimes you need to drain the poison out before it kills you. He looked at me. She was talking about your Uncle Carlos, when he cheated on your aunt. Your mother told your aunt the same thing, not revenge. Drainage. He went back to his beer. The sun dropped behind the house across the street. Shadows lengthened across the porch. Whatever you decide to do, he said, make sure it's something you can carry because you're going to carry it for the rest of your life. I drove home with those words sitting in the passenger seat, heavy as a person. Over the next 10 days, I moved money like a man defusing a bomb. Carefully. Slowly. One wrong wire and the whole thing blows. New checking account at Security Service Federal Credit Union, a military credit union in San Antonio that Ashley had no connection to. I redirected 70% of my direct deposit there, leaving 30% flowing into our joint account at Frost Bank, enough to cover my share of the bills, enough to look normal if she ever checked. She didn't check. She hadn't logged into the Frost account in 6 weeks. I knew this because I checked the login history. The last time she'd accessed it was August 12th, before the affair had even started, back when our money was just our money and not the funding mechanism for someone else's motel room. I transferred my half of the savings. $3,400 exactly, calculated to the penny, not a dollar more than what was mine. Samantha had been clear about this. Take what's yours, not a cent of hers. The court would look at the withdrawal and it needed to be defensible. Ashley didn't notice. She didn't notice because she'd stopped looking. At the money, at the house, at me. Her attention was a flashlight beam pointed somewhere else, and I was standing in the dark she'd left behind, quietly moving furniture. Blake, meanwhile, had done something I hadn't asked for but would need. He'd found Jessica Muñoz. She works the garden center, he told me at lunch on a Tuesday. We were in his car in the Midas parking lot because the break room smelled worse than usual. Something had died in the wall. We'd been saying we'd deal with it for 2 weeks. She's been at that Lowe's for 3 years. She's the one Mark got written up for. I told her I was a friend of someone affected by Mark's behavior, which I mean technically true. She talked to you? Not at first. She's scared. She thinks Mark could get her fired if she makes noise. I told her he's not going to be in a position to fire anyone pretty soon. Blake. I didn't say anything specific. I just told her if she was ever willing to talk, I had a friend who'd listen. She took my number. He bit into his taco. She texted me last night. She's willing to meet. 2 days later, I sat across from Jessica Muñoz in a booth at the Denny's off I-10. She was 30, small, dark eyes that moved constantly, checking the door, checking the parking lot, checking that no one she knew was in the restaurant. She had a coffee in front of her that she stirred and stirred without drinking. The spoon made a small, rhythmic sound against the ceramic that I found oddly calming. I don't want to be involved in anything, she said. First words, no hello, just the boundary. I understand that. I mean it. I need my job. I've got a kid. I'm not going to use your name unless you tell me I can. I just need to know what you know. She studied me, sizing me up, deciding whether I was someone she could trust or someone who would make her life harder. I let her look. I had nothing to hide and everything to lose, and both of those things were probably visible in my face. Mark Brewer is a creep, she said, flat, declarative, the way you state a fact you're tired of having to prove. He hit on me for 3 months when I started, comments about my body, texting me after hours, showing up in the garden center during my shifts to check inventory that didn't need checking. You reported it. I told my supervisor. He talked to Mark. Mark denied it. They moved my break time so we wouldn't overlap. That was it. She finally took a sip of the coffee, made a face. It had gone cold. 6 months ago, he started bragging in the break room about having someone, not her name, just I got this thing going. He showed pictures on his phone. My stomach tightened. What kind of pictures? Nothing explicit, her at dinner, her in his truck, enough that you could tell it wasn't his wife. One of the guys asked who she was and Mark just grinned and said, "Wouldn't you like to know?" I processed that. Mark showing photos of Ashley to his coworkers, casual, like a trophy, like she was something he'd caught and wanted to display. He also said something about his wife. Jessica looked at me directly now. He told the guys in receiving that Sarah would never leave him. He said she was too comfortable and too scared to start over. He said it like it was a joke. Too comfortable, too scared. That's what Mark Brewer thought about the woman he'd been married to for 15 years. Not a partner, not a person, a captive audience. Someone so beaten down by the reality of her life that she'd absorb any humiliation rather than face the alternative. He was about to find out how wrong he was. "Would you be willing to write any of this down?" I asked. "A statement, in your own words, just what you saw and heard." Jessica hesitated. The spoon went back to stirring, round and round and round. "If it keeps my name out of court, I'll write something, but I swear if this comes back on me." "It won't, I promise." She nodded, slowly. The way a person nods when they're agreeing to something they'll probably regret but know is right. I paid for her coffee. She left first. I sat in the booth for another 10 minutes watching the parking lot, adding Jessica Munoz to the map in my head. Phone records, bank statements, photos, texts, a coworker's testimony, a harassment complaint, a secret apartment. The machine was built. Every bolt was torqued. Every wire was connected. Now I needed to start the engine. 2 weeks after the first photos, Mark Brewer texted me again. I was sitting on the back porch after dinner. Ashley was inside watching something on TV. The backyard was dark except for the light that spilled through the kitchen window and the orange glow of the neighbor's porch lamp through the fence. I could hear crickets. I could hear traffic on the highway 2 blocks over. I could hear the specific silence of a marriage that was running on fumes. My phone buzzed. Unknown number, same one as before. This time it wasn't photos. It was a voice memo, 37 seconds long. The little play button sat there on my screen like a landmine. I pressed it. Ashley's voice, low, intimate. The kind of voice you only use with someone you've let past every wall you've ever built. She was saying things meant for a dark room and one person's ears. Private things. Things that belonged to no one but the moment they were spoken in. And they were recorded, without her knowledge, by a man who thought intimacy was inventory, something to stockpile and deploy. After the voice memo, a text. "Thought you might want to hear how happy she really is. You should thank me, man. I'm giving her what you can't." I listened to it once, just once. Then I set the phone face down on the armrest of the plastic lawn chair, and I sat in the dark for a very long time, listening to the crickets, and I thought about what it would feel like to drive to Mark Brewer's house and put my hands around his throat. Not in an abstract way, in a specific, detailed, blueprinted way. I thought about the route I'd take. The highway to 1604, the exit at Bandera, the neighborhood where Sarah and Mark lived that I'd looked up on Google Maps 3 weeks ago. I thought about knocking on the door. I thought about what his face would look like when he opened it. Whether the smile would be there. Whether it would disappear when he saw mine. I sat with that fantasy for about 10 minutes. Let it play out in full, vivid detail. And then I did what I always do when an engine is running too hot. I shut it off and let it cool. But the next day I cracked. I drove to Lowe's, not after work, during my lunch break. I told Blake I had an errand. He gave me a look that said he didn't believe me, but he didn't argue. Blake had learned when to push and when to step back. He stepped back. I walked into the store. The automatic doors parted with a hiss. Cold, air-conditioned air hit my face. The smell of lumber and fertilizer and new plastic. I walked past the registers, past the seasonal display of leaf blowers and rakes, past a woman loading bags of mulch onto a flatbed cart. I found him in the electrical aisle, stocking shelves, his blue vest, his khaki pants. He was crouching, putting boxes of outlet covers on a low shelf, and when he stood up and saw me, he smiled. He actually smiled. "Hey, Adrian, how's Ashley?" The words came out casual, easy, like we were friends, like he was asking about the weather. "How's Ashley?" The woman we were both sleeping with, except I wasn't anymore, because every time she reached for me in the dark, my body recoiled like it was touching something that had been in someone else's hands. I stepped forward, close. Close enough to see the pores on his nose and the stubble on his jaw and the cheap cologne that smelled like something you'd buy at a drugstore checkout. The kind that comes in a bottle shaped like a grenade because the marketing department thought insecurity could be packaged as aggression. His smile faltered, just barely, a flicker. The way a candle flame flinches when a door opens somewhere in the house. Every synapse in my body was firing the same command. Swing, swing now, one punch, just one. He's right there. His jaw is right there. You can feel the distance. You know the angle. You know what a fist feels like when it connects with bone because you punched a steering wheel last week and the echo of that impact is still in your knuckles. I didn't swing. I said very quietly so that only he could hear, "You recorded her without her consent. That's a felony in Texas." His smile vanished, completely, like someone had wiped it off with a rag. His eyes changed. Not scared yet, confused, the confusion of a man who expected rage and got something colder. I turned around and walked out, down the aisle, past the registers, through the automatic doors, into the parking lot, into my truck. I put the key in the ignition and my hands were shaking so badly that it took 3 tries to turn it. The engine caught. I sat there with the AC blowing on my face and my heart trying to punch its way out of my ribcage. That smile, that stupid, smug, practiced smile. It almost cost me everything, because if I'd swung, I'd have been arrested. I'd have a record. I'd have given Mark exactly what he wanted, proof that I was the dangerous one, proof that Ashley was safer with him. Proof that the man she'd married was violent and unstable and deserving of whatever she'd done behind his back. Luckily for everyone, I'm a mechanic, and mechanics know that the most dangerous thing in a shop isn't the tools. It's impatience. I drove back to Midas. Blake took one look at me and put an extra taco on my toolbox without saying a word. That week, something shifted at home. Ashley had started watching me, not obviously, not staring, but I could feel it. The way you can feel someone's eyes on you even when you're not looking at them. She was tracking my mood, my patterns, my responses, with the nervous attention of someone who senses that the foundation is moving under her feet. "You okay?" she asked on Thursday night. We were in the kitchen. She was making rice and beans. The stove burner hissed. "You seem, I don't know, quiet." "I'm always quiet. Quieter than usual. Long week." She stirred the beans, didn't look at me. "Is something going on at work?" "Nothing new. Maybe we should go out this weekend, like a date night. We haven't done that in a while." I looked at her. She was making an effort. I could see it in the rigidity of her shoulders, the deliberate casualness of her voice. She was testing the walls, checking for cracks. Not because she was worried about me, because she was worried about herself. Because a husband who's too quiet is a husband who might know something, and a date night would be a thermometer she could stick in the marriage to check if it was still alive. "Sure," I said. "That sounds nice." She looked relieved. The relief was visible, physical. Her shoulders dropped. Her stirring hand relaxed. She smiled, and it was a real smile, and I cataloged it the way I cataloged everything now, not as a moment, as evidence. Proof that she valued the appearance of the marriage more than the marriage itself. She didn't want a date night. She wanted reassurance that her cover was still intact. I gave it to her, because the filing was 12 days away and 12 days of performance was a small price to pay for a lifetime of truth. On Monday, I brought the voice memo to Samantha Aldridge. She listened to it in her office with the door closed. Her face didn't change. When it ended, she set her phone down and looked at me. "Texas is a one-party consent state," she said. "That means someone who's a party to a conversation can record it without informing the other party, but this recording was made by a third party. Mr. Brewer recorded your wife without her knowledge and then distributed it without her consent. What does that mean? It means he may have committed a crime. Distribution of intimate content without consent is a Class A misdemeanor in Texas. It's also grounds for a civil suit. Combined with the photos he sent you, which depict your wife in sexually explicit situations and were sent to you without her knowledge or consent, Mr. Brewer's exposure is significant." She paused, folded her hands. The gesture she made when she was about to say something important. "Mr. Delgado, when you use this material, and I say when because I believe you will, everyone's life changes, not just your wife's, not just Mr. Brewer's, yours. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes." "Are you prepared for the after? Because the after is longer than the during. The during is weeks. The after is the rest of your life." I thought about my father's question on the porch. "What do you want to happen after?" "I'm ready," I said. She nodded. "Then we're almost there. One more thing. I need you to refrain from any contact with Mr. Brewer. No confrontations, no texts, no visits to his workplace. Can you do that?" I thought about the Lowe's aisle, the smile, the cologne. The shaking hands in the parking lot. "Yeah," I said, "I can do that." That night I found the last piece. Ashley's iPad was on the kitchen counter. An old one, second generation, that she used mostly for recipes and Pinterest and the kind of idle scrolling people do when they're waiting for water to boil. I knew it was synced to her phone because I'd set up the sync myself 2 years ago when her storage was full and she needed her messages backed up. She was in the shower. The water was running. She'd taken her phone with her this time, tucked into the pocket of her robe on the hook outside the shower door. She'd started doing that recently. The phone was never more than arm's reach from her now, but the iPad was still on the counter, and it still used the old passcode. The one she'd changed on her phone but never updated on the tablet because who thinks about the tablet? I picked it up. I typed the old code. It opened. Her messages were there, synced, all of them. I scrolled to the conversation with Alexis Herrera. Not with Alexis too, with the real Alexis, the friend, the confidant, the co-conspirator. What I read in that conversation took everything I thought I knew and burned it down to the studs. Ashley to Alexis 3 weeks ago, I think I'm in love with him. Alexis, with Mark. Ashley, I know it sounds crazy, but when I'm with him I feel like I can breathe. Adrian is so steady. It's like living with a wall. Alexis, have you thought about leaving? Ashley, every day, but the money, we can't afford 2 places, and Adrian would get the house because he makes more. Alexis, wait until tax season, take the refund and use it to get set up somewhere. Ashley, that's 3 months away. Alexis, then wait 3 months, what's 3 months? And then the message that stopped my blood, the one that I'll carry with me until the day I die, the way my father carries labeled boxes and the memory of a woman who knew she was dying. Ashley, Adrian doesn't deserve this. He's a good man, but I can't help what I feel. He's a good man, she knew. She knew I was good. She said it plainly, without qualification, to the one person she trusted with the truth. Not as a defense, not as an excuse, as a fact. A simple, clinical acknowledgement that the person she was destroying was someone worth preserving, and she was going to do it anyway. I stared at those words until the shower shut off. Then I screenshotted the conversation, emailed it to my secure Gmail, set the iPad down exactly where it had been, and walked to the back porch. The folder was full. The case was complete. Every bolt tightened, every wire connected, every diagnostic run. I knew who, I knew how, I knew how long, I knew the financial mechanics, I knew the accomplices. And now I knew that my wife had described me as a good man in the same conversation where she planned to rob me of my tax refund and leave me for a man who recorded her without her consent. The machine was built. It was time to start it. I didn't text Sarah Brewer. That would have been too easy to dismiss. A message from a stranger on social media with wild accusations and blurry photos. She'd seen 100 of those in her work. Desperate spouses, anonymous tips, bitter exes trying to weaponize information. A text message would have landed in a folder labeled unverified and stayed there. Instead, I wrote a letter, by hand, on plain white paper. The kind you buy at Office Depot in a ream of 500 because it's $4.99 and it works. I sat at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon while Ashley was at her sister's house, and I wrote with a blue ballpoint pen that I'd been carrying in my shirt pocket at Midas for 3 years. The ink was slightly uneven. My handwriting was rough. A mechanic's handwriting. The handwriting of a man who signs invoices and work orders, not love letters or legal documents. I didn't call Mark names. I didn't editorialize. I didn't beg. I wrote the letter the way I write a diagnostic report for a customer when the news is bad. Here's what I found. Here's the evidence. Here's what it means. Dear Mrs. Brewer, my name is Adrian Delgado. I'm a mechanic at the Midas on Fredericksburg Road. I'm writing to you because I have evidence that your husband, Mark Brewer, has been having an affair with my wife, Ashley Delgado, for approximately 7 months. I have no reason to lie to you and nothing to gain from this letter except the belief that you deserve to know the truth the same way I did. Enclosed is a summary of the evidence, along with a thumb drive containing documentation. My phone number is at the bottom of this page. I'm sorry. I printed the evidence summary on my home printer. A timeline, dates, key screenshots, redacted for anything too explicit because I didn't know this woman and she didn't need to see what I'd seen. The voice memo was on the thumb drive, along with the full photo evidence and the phone records and the financial documentation. I put it all in a manila envelope, sealed it, wrote on the front, Sarah Brewer, personal and confidential. Monday morning on my way to work, I stopped at Aldridge Family Law. The office was just opening. A different receptionist this time, not Sarah, a young woman I didn't recognize. I handed her the envelope and asked her to please make sure it got to Sarah Brewer personally. She said she would. I thanked her and left. And then I waited. 48 hours is not a long time. It's 2 days. It's 4 shifts at Midas. It's 16 oil changes and a handful of brake jobs and a couple alignments and 1 transmission flush that took longer than it should have because the drain plug was seized and I had to use a breaker bar. 48 hours is nothing. It was the longest 48 hours of my life. I went to work. I came home. I ate dinner with Ashley, who had entered what I privately called her good wife phase, a period of conspicuous attentiveness that might have fooled me 2 months ago but now looked exactly like what it was. A woman trying to shore up the walls of a building she could feel shifting. She made my favorite meals. She asked about my day. She suggested we watch a movie together on Tuesday night, and we did, some comedy I can't remember the name of, and she laughed and I laughed and the laughter was real, and that was the worst part, that even now, even with the envelope delivered and the clock ticking, there were still real moments between us. Moments where I forgot for a second. Moments where the person I married and the person who'd betrayed me merged back into a single woman sitting next to me on the couch. And I loved her, and I hated her, and the 2 feelings existed simultaneously like 2 songs playing at the same time, each one making the other impossible to hear clearly. Blake watched me at work with the focused attention of a man monitoring a pressure gauge. He knew something was happening. He didn't ask what. He just made sure there was always an extra taco on my toolbox. The call came on Wednesday evening, 7:23 p.m., unknown number. My phone buzzed in my pocket while I was standing in the kitchen rinsing dishes. Ashley was in the living room. I could hear the television. I dried my hands on the towel, pulled out the phone, and answered. Hello. Mr. Delgado, a woman's voice, controlled, perfectly level, the kind of level that takes enormous effort to maintain, like a tightrope walker who looks calm from the ground but is making 1,000 micro-adjustments per second to keep from falling. This is Sarah Brewer. I received your envelope. Yes, ma'am. I've reviewed everything, the thumb drive, the timeline, all of it. A breath. Not a sigh, a controlled intake of air. I have 3 questions for you and I need you to answer honestly. Go ahead. When did you first discover the affair? About 6 weeks ago, early October. Have you confronted either of them, your wife or my husband? No, my wife doesn't know I know. I went to the Lowe's once. I told your husband I knew about the recording. That's it. Have you filed for divorce? Not yet. My attorney says we're close. A pause, a long one. I could hear her breathing. I could hear beneath her breathing the faint sound of children in the background, a television, a house that sounded like a home. Mr. Delgado, my husband has done this before. I said nothing. I let her talk. Twice that I know of. The first time was 8 years ago. A woman he worked with at a different job. The second was 4 years ago, someone he met at a bar. Another breath. Both times I found out through rumors, second-hand information, things I could convince myself weren't true if I tried hard enough. And I tried hard enough, because I had 2 kids and a mortgage and 15 years invested, and I told myself that staying was strength. She paused. But he's never been stupid enough to send evidence directly to the other husband. He's never documented his own affair and hand-delivered it to the one person with the most motivation to use it against him. The silence stretched. I could feel her recalibrating, processing, rebuilding. He just handed me everything I've needed for a decade. I didn't know what to say to that. So I said the only honest thing I had. I'm sorry. Don't be, you didn't do this. He did. A beat. I'd like to meet with you in person. Are you available this week? Name the time. Thursday, noon. There's a taco cabana on Loop 1604 near the Lowe's. I almost laughed. The same taco cabana where I'd sat in my truck eating a bean and cheese taco I couldn't taste, watching my wife drive into a parking lot to meet another woman's husband. The universe has a sense of humor. It's just not a very funny one. I'll be there, I said. Thank you, Mr. Delgado, for the letter, for the evidence, for being a decent man in the middle of something indecent. She hung up. I stood in the kitchen with the phone in my hand and the water still running in the sink and the sound of the television coming from the other room where my wife was watching something and laughing at something and living in a reality that was about to be demolished, and I felt a sensation I wasn't expecting. Not triumph. Not relief, Not even satisfaction. Grief. Because this was really happening now. The letter was delivered. The ally was activated. The machine was running, and there was no off switch. No recall, no taking it back. Everything from this point forward was consequence. Thursday, noon, Taco Cabana. Sarah Brewer was already there when I arrived. Booth in the back corner, coffee, black. She was wearing a blazer over a simple blouse, her work clothes, professional armor. Her hair was pulled back. No makeup or minimal makeup, the kind that's designed to look like no makeup, which I only noticed because Ashley had started wearing more of it recently, and I'd become an unwilling expert in the semiotics of a woman's appearance. She looked up when I sat down. Her eyes were dry, sharp. The eyes of a woman who had cried all her tears in private and arrived at this table ready for war. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for calling." We looked at each other. Two strangers in a fast food booth, bound by the same lie, sitting under fluorescent lights with plastic trays and paper napkins and the smell of refried beans. Not exactly a war council, but that's what it was. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to understand what it means." "Okay." "I'm a paralegal. I've worked in family law for 11 years. I've helped build over 200 divorce cases. I know how assets are hidden, how affairs are documented, how custody is structured, how men protect their money, and how women find it anyway. I've seen every version of this." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. They were shaking, just barely, the only crack in the armor. "I've been building my own file on Mark for 5 years, not because I had proof, because I'm a paralegal. We keep files." "What kind of file?" "Everything, his income, his debts, the truck he can barely afford. The apartment on Wurzbach that I've known about for 3 years and never mentioned because knowing about it was more useful than confronting him about it. His credit card statements, his spending patterns, his habits." She looked at me. "I stayed because I was collecting. I told myself I stayed because of the kids, because of the mortgage. Because starting over at 38 with 2 children is terrifying. All of that is true. But the real reason is that I was waiting for proof, and you just gave it to me." I sat with that for a moment. This woman had spent 5 years building a case against her own husband while living in his house, sleeping in his bed, accepting his Valentine's Day posts, rotating his wedding ring on her finger. 5 years of strategic patience. 5 years of controlled rage disguised as domesticity. I thought I was the patient one. I was an amateur. "Here's what I'm proposing," she said. "We coordinate. You file through your attorney, I file through mine, a different firm to avoid any conflict of interest. We time it for the same week, preferably the same day. He gets served at work, she gets served at work. Neither of them sees it coming. Neither of them has time to hide money, destroy evidence, or coordinate their stories. You've thought this through." "I've had 5 years to think it through. I just needed the trigger." She took a sip of coffee, set it down. "His truck payment is 11 months from being paid off. He thinks that's an asset. It's actually a liability because the value has depreciated below what he owes. The apartment lease has 4 months left. He signed it under his name only, which means it's his debt, not mine. He has $12,000 in credit card debt that I found on a statement in his glove compartment 2 years ago. $12,000, on a salary of $34,000 a year." She recited these numbers the way I recite torque specifications, from memory, without hesitation, with the confidence of someone who has reviewed the data so many times it lives in their bones. "He told his coworkers I would never leave him," I said, "because I was too comfortable." Sarah's jaw tightened. A muscle moved. Then she said evenly, "He told his coworkers that because he needed to believe it, because the alternative that I was staying by choice for reasons he couldn't comprehend was too threatening. He needed me to be weak, because if I was strong, then what was he?" We sat in silence for a moment. The Taco Cabana hummed around us. A family of 4 was eating at a table near the window, 2 kids, a boy and a girl, arguing about something. Their mother was refereeing. Their father was on his phone. "I'm not doing this out of anger," Sarah said. "I need you to understand that. Anger burned off a long time ago. I'm doing this because I spent 15 years being the woman who stayed, and I refuse to be that woman for one more day. When do we go? Your attorney says 2 weeks. About that. Then 2 weeks, I'll be ready. I've been ready for 5 years. We shook hands across the table. Her grip was firm, her hand was cold. The coffee hadn't warmed it. Nothing would warm it, I suspected, until this was over. I drove home. Ashley had made chicken enchiladas, my favorite. The house smelled like green chili and melted cheese and the particular warmth of a kitchen where someone has been cooking for someone they love, or for someone they're trying very hard to appear to love, which from the outside looks exactly the same. She was trying. I could see it. Something in her had shifted over the past week. Some animal instinct, the way dogs pace before a storm, the way birds go quiet before an earthquake. She sensed it. She couldn't name it. But she was responding the only way she knew how, by being the wife she should have been all along. "I made enchiladas," she said. Unnecessary statement. The evidence was everywhere. But she said it the way you announce a gift. "Look what I did for you. Smells amazing." We ate. She told me about a patient at the dental office who'd passed out during a cleaning. The way she told it was funny. The guy was terrified of the dentist and tried to tough it out and fainted right there in the chair, and Ashley had to catch his head before it hit the armrest. She was laughing as she told it, the genuine laugh, and I was laughing too because it was funny, and because laughter is the last reflex to die in a marriage, the final vital sign that keeps blipping on the monitor even when everything else has flatlined. After dinner, she fell asleep on the couch. We were watching some home renovation show, the kind where people with impossible budgets transform houses into things that look nothing like the houses real people live in. She was curled up with her head on my shoulder. Her hair smelled like coconut, the new shampoo. The one she'd bought to smell good for someone else, but that was currently pressed against my neck, and I could feel her breath, slow and warm, against my collarbone. I didn't move. I sat there with my wife sleeping weight against me and the television playing images of someone else's beautiful house. And I thought about the thumb drive in my truck and the envelope in Sarah Brewer's hands and the phone call scheduled for tomorrow with Samantha Aldridge to set the filing date. This was the last night of this version of our life. The last night of fajitas and face-down phones and lies we told each other in the same kitchen, and a marriage that was already dead but hadn't stopped breathing yet. Tomorrow, I would start tearing it down. I sat there for a long time after she fell asleep. I felt her weight against me, the specific gravity of a person you've shared a bed with for 7 years, whose body your body knows by heart, whose breathing patterns you've memorized without trying. I knew when she was dreaming. I knew when she was about to wake up. I knew the exact sound she made when she rolled over in the night, a small, unconscious sigh that used to make me feel like the luckiest man alive. The television glowed blue in the dark room. The renovation show ended. Another one started. I didn't change the channel. I didn't move. I just sat there holding the ending in my hands, and I felt something I want to be honest about because this story doesn't work if I lie to you. I felt grief. Not anger, not righteousness. Not the cold satisfaction of a plan coming together. Grief. Deep, hollow, aching grief for the thing that was already dead. For the marriage that could have been. For the woman who fell asleep on my shoulder because she was tired and I was warm and some part of her still trusted me enough to be unconscious in my presence. She trusted me. Right now, in this moment, she was trusting me the way you trust a wall. Because I'd always been here. Because I'd never left. Because steady, boring, reliable Adrian Delgado would always be right where she left him. And I would be tomorrow, and the day after, and every day after that. But the man she fell asleep next to tonight and the man she'd wake up to in the morning were not the same person. The one who sat still while the ground moved was gone. In his place was someone who'd learned that silence isn't peace. Silence is just a slower way of bleeding out. I kissed the top of her head. One last time. Not for her, for me. For the version of us that had existed before Mark Brewer and face-down phones and motels on Broadway. Then I closed my eyes, and for the first time in 6 weeks I slept. Monday morning, December 7th, 2015. I wore a clean shirt to the law office, not my Midas polo, a button-down I hadn't worn since a cousin's wedding 2 years ago. It still smelled faintly of the closet, of cedar and dust, and a life where dressing up meant something was being celebrated. I was not celebrating, but I wanted to look like a man who had his affairs in order. No pun intended. Samantha Aldridge had the paperwork ready. She'd prepared it over the weekend. I sat across from her desk and signed where she pointed, petition for divorce. Financial disclosure, affidavit of evidence. Each signature took 3 seconds. Each one ended a piece of something that had taken years to build. My hand was steady. I'd expected it to shake. It didn't. "Once this is filed with the court, service will be expedited," Samantha said. "Your wife will be served at her place of employment today, typically within a few hours." And the other filing. Mrs. Brewer's attorney filed at 9 this morning. Different courthouse. Mr. Brewer will be served at Lowe's this afternoon. Synchronized detonation. 2 bombs, 2 locations, same day. Sarah had timed it with the precision of someone who'd spent a decade watching attorneys do this to other people's husbands. Now it was her turn, and she wasn't wasting a single minute. I drove to Midas. I changed the oil on a Honda Accord and a Chevy Silverado and a Nissan Altima with 180,000 miles that needed more prayers than service. I worked with my hands, and my hands did what they always did, and inside my chest something was ticking like a countdown. Blake knew. He didn't say anything. He just worked his bay and kept one eye on me the way you watch a pot that's about to boil. At 1:47 p.m. my phone buzzed. Text from Samantha's office. "Service completed. Respondent has been served at place of employment." Ashley had just been handed divorce papers at the dental office, while Alexis watched, while patients sat in the waiting room. While the receptionist who'd spent 7 months lying to her husband stood behind her desk, and the world she'd constructed fell apart in the time it took a process server to say her name and hand her an envelope. I set the phone down. I slid back under the Altima. I tightened a bolt. The wrench felt heavier than usual. Meanwhile, across town at the Lowe's on Loop 1604, Mark Brewer was getting his own delivery. I found out the details later through Blake, who heard it from a guy who worked lumber. The process server found Mark in the lumber aisle. He was helping a customer load 2x4s onto a cart. The server walked up, asked his name, and handed him the papers. Mark stood there holding a stack of legal documents in one hand and a piece of lumber in the other, and the customer he'd been helping looked at him and said, "You okay, man?" And Mark didn't answer. He just walked toward the back of the store. He didn't come back for 20 minutes. Jessica Munoz was on shift that day. She told Blake later that Mark came back from the break room looking like a man who'd been punched in the stomach and was still deciding whether to fall down. His face was gray. His hands were shaking. The blue vest that had always seemed like a costume for a character he was playing now just looked like what it was. A uniform for a man who stocked shelves for $34,000 a year and had just lost everything else. My phone started ringing at 2:15, Ashley's number. I sent it to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. Again. 17 times that afternoon while I worked, while I torqued bolts and checked fluid levels and wrote up tickets. 17 calls. I let every single one ring through to the silence on the other end. At 6:30, sitting in my truck in the Midas lot for the last time as a married man who hadn't yet spoken the words out loud, I answered the 18th call. The sound that came through the phone was not the sound I'd expected. I'd imagined anger, defensiveness, the controlled, strategic tears of a woman who'd been caught and was cycling through her options. What I got was something rower, ugly crying, the kind that makes it hard to breathe, the kind that comes from a place so deep it bypasses the brain entirely and comes out as pure animal distress. Adrian, please, just let me explain, please." "Explain what?" It wasn't, I love you, Adrian, you have to believe me." "How long, Ashley?" Silence, breathing, a hiccup. "How long?" 7 months. 7, not 2, not the 6 weeks I'd spent investigating. 7 months. She'd been lying since May, since spring. Since the bluebonnets were blooming on the highway medians and we talked about driving out to take photos of them and never did. "I'm staying at my dad's," I said. "Don't call me again tonight." I hung up. I sat in the truck. The sun was setting again, a different sunset from the one 6 weeks ago when Mark's photos had arrived. Cooler now, December. The light was thinner, paler, less forgiving. Part of me wanted to call her back. I need you to know that. Part of me, the part that remembered the barbecue where she laughed and spilled beer on my shoes, the part that remembered her asleep on my shoulder 3 days ago, that part wanted to surrender. To go home. To pretend the last 6 weeks were a nightmare I could wake up from if I just closed my eyes hard enough. I didn't call her back. I drove to my father's house. Antonio had made migas, 2 plates on the table. He'd known I was coming without being told, the way he always knew things, through some frequency of fatherhood that operated below the range of normal hearing. We ate in silence. The migas were good. Eggs, tortilla strips, cheese, jalapenos. The food of a man who learned to cook after his wife died because the alternative was starving or eating out of cans, and Antonio Vega did not eat out of cans. At 8:15, my phone rang. Alexis Herrera. I almost didn't answer. But something in me, some tired, final version of the man who used to believe in giving people a chance, picked up. "Adrian, listen to me." Alexis's voice was rushed, urgent. The voice of a woman who'd rehearsed her speech on the drive over and was afraid she'd lose her nerve if she slowed down. "Ashley made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but she's a good person. You know she's a good person. People deserve second chances. People deserve. Alexis. The opportunity to make things right. She's devastated. Alexis, stop." She stopped. "You knew about this for months. You helped her lie. You looked me in the face at barbecues and asked me to pass the guacamole while another man was sleeping with my wife. You drove her to that Lowe's parking lot. You gave her alibis. You watched me lose weight and lose sleep and you said nothing." Silence. "Don't talk to me about second chances. You used yours." I hung up. Antonio was washing dishes. He didn't turn around. He didn't comment. He just ran the water and scrubbed a plate and set it in the rack. And the sound of that routine, that simple act of cleaning up after a meal, was the most comforting thing I'd heard in 6 weeks. The last call came at 9:40 p.m., Antonio's landline. The actual house phone, the one mounted on the kitchen wall like it was still 1994, the one that only rang when telemarketers or relatives called. Antonio picked up. I watched his face change, not anger, something colder. He listened for about 10 seconds, then spoke. "My son is not here, and if you come to my home, I will call the police first, and then I will call my son, and then you will have a much bigger problem than you already have." He hung up, turned to me. "That was Mark Brewer. He got the address from Ashley. He says he wants to talk. He can talk to his lawyer. He doesn't sound like a man who's thinking about lawyers. He sounds like a man who's thinking about doing something stupid." Antonio dried his hands on the dish towel. "Scared men do stupid things, Mijo. Be careful." I stayed at my father's house that night. I slept in my old bedroom, the one with the faded Spurs poster on the wall and the twin bed that was 3 inches too short for my adult body. I lay there in the dark with my feet hanging off the edge and listened to the house settle around me, the way houses do at night, all creaks and sighs like old bones finding their position. I didn't count ceiling fan rotations. There was no ceiling fan. Just a flat, still ceiling in a room that smelled like my childhood, like the ghost of my mother's laundry detergent, and I thought, so this is what the after looks like. A twin bed in your father's house, migas on the stove, a phone full of missed calls from a life that's already over. I closed my eyes. Somewhere across the city, 2 marriages were ending. 2 men were losing their wives. One of them deserved it. The other was me. Mark Brewer lasted 9 days at Lowe's after being served. Not because they fired him immediately, because he fired himself. Piece by piece, decision by decision, the way a man dismantles his own life when he's panicking and every instinct tells him to move, but none of them tell him where. Day 1 after the serving, he left his shift 3 hours early to make phone calls from the parking lot. His supervisor docked his pay. Day 3, he showed up with liquor on his breath at 8 in the morning. Not falling down drunk, but enough that the kid in plumbing could smell it when Mark walked past. Someone reported it. A written warning was placed in his file. Day 6, he got into an argument with a customer over a return policy, and the customer filed a complaint, and the store manager pulled Mark into the office and told him to take 2 days off and get himself together. He didn't get himself together. On day 9, Jessica Munoz walked into the HR office and filed a formal complaint about Mark's behavior from 6 months earlier. The harassment. The comments, the break room photo showing. She'd been carrying it all this time, afraid to speak, afraid of what he might do. But Mark Brewer was no longer a man anyone was afraid of. He was a man falling apart in public, and Jessica decided that the falling was her opportunity to finally tell the truth. Lowe's terminated Mark Brewer on a Wednesday afternoon. Escorted out by the store manager and a security guard. Blue vest returned. Employee badge surrendered. 15 years of retail management experience reduced to a cardboard box of personal items carried across a parking lot in December. Without a paycheck, the dominoes fell fast. The secret apartment on Wurzbach, the one Sarah had known about for 3 years but never mentioned, went first. Mark couldn't make the rent. The landlord gave him a week. He didn't have a week's worth of anything. Sarah's attorney, meanwhile, had already added the apartment to the asset disclosure as evidence of financial deception. Mark hadn't just hidden a love nest. He'd hidden a lease payment, which meant he'd been lying about his income and expenses for years. In divorce court, that's not just bad behavior, that's fraud. The truck went next. A Ford F-150 he'd been making payments on for 4 years, a vehicle that cost more per month than most people's grocery bills, a truck he'd bought because he wanted to look like a certain kind of man. The repo company came at 2 in the morning. I heard this from Blake, who heard it from the lumber kid at Lowe's. Mark was sleeping on a coworker's couch when it happened. He walked outside in the morning and the truck was gone, and he stood in the driveway in his boxers and a t-shirt and stared at the empty space where it had been. Sarah, meanwhile, was operating with a calm efficiency that I found both admirable and slightly terrifying. She'd filed the restraining order within 24 hours of the serving, citing the explicit photos Mark had distributed without consent. The judge granted it the same day. She'd changed the locks on their house legally with a court order. She'd frozen their joint accounts. She'd contacted Mark's credit card companies and notified them of the pending divorce, which triggered a review of his spending and revealed $12,000 in debt he'd accumulated without telling her. She did all of this while getting her 2 kids to school every morning and going to work every day and cooking dinner every night. I know because she told me in a brief phone call 3 days after the serving. Her voice was steady, functional, the voice of a woman running on adrenaline and professionalism and a decade of suppressed rage that had finally been given a direction. His attorney tried to argue the photos were personal communications, she said. Inadmissible. What happened? The judge asked Mark's attorney if his client had personally sent explicit images to a third party for the purpose of harassment. His attorney said it was more complicated than that. The judge said it wasn't. I almost smiled. Almost. 2 weeks after the filing, Ashley left a letter at my father's house. I found it on the porch, tucked under the welcome mat. Handwritten, 4 pages. The handwriting was shaky in places, tight and controlled in others, like she'd written parts of it crying and parts of it angry and parts of it with the numb calm of someone who's run out of both. I read it on the porch step, in the December cold, with a jacket that wasn't warm enough and a cup of coffee Antonio had handed me without being asked. She acknowledged everything. The affair. The lies, the money, Alexis's involvement, the timeline. She didn't minimize it, she didn't blame me. She said she'd started seeing a therapist. She said she was beginning to understand patterns from her childhood. She said she didn't expect forgiveness. The letter was genuine, I could tell. After 7 years with someone, you learn the difference between their performance voice and their real one, even on paper. This was real. But here's the thing about genuine that I learned standing on that porch. Genuine after the fact is not the same as honest during. A deathbed confession isn't courage. It's inventory. You're not telling the truth because it's right. You're telling the truth because you've run out of room for lies. I folded the letter. I put it in the drawer of my old desk in my old bedroom. I didn't respond. The West Side, as I'd expected, became a courtroom of public opinion. San Antonio is a big city, but neighborhoods are small, and the West Side is smaller than most. Everyone knew someone who knew someone. Adrian's wife cheated with a married man. The married man's wife is a paralegal. Both marriages are done. Did you hear? Did you hear? Most people sided with me, not all. A couple we'd known since our wedding, Danny and Rosa, stopped returning my calls, not because they supported Ashley, because they didn't want to be associated with the wreckage. I understood that. Wreckage is contagious. People stay away from car crashes not because they don't care, but because they're afraid of being hit by debris. I lost 2 friends. I gained clarity about what friendship actually means. Blake never wavered. My father never wavered, and that was enough. 3 weeks after the filing, Blake called me on a Tuesday night. "Thought you should know," he said. "Your boy Mark is officially homeless." He'd been evicted from the apartment. Couch surfed with a coworker until the coworker's wife said he had to go. Tried to call Ashley, but Ashley was drowning in her own disaster. Served with divorce papers, facing the loss of the house, watching her credit card debt come to light, dealing with the social fallout at the dental office where everyone now knew everything. She could barely keep herself afloat. She certainly couldn't carry Mark. Mark Brewer, the man who'd sent me photos with a smile, the man who'd asked, "How's Ashley?" In the Lowe's aisle like we were old friends, was sleeping in his car, except he didn't have a car anymore. Blake told me this and waited for my reaction. I think he expected something. Satisfaction, relief, maybe even pity. What he got was silence, because I felt nothing. Not the sharp nothing of anger or the hollow nothing of sadness, just nothing. The flat, gray nothing of a man watching the last ember die in a fire he'd already walked away from. "You good?" Blake asked. "Yeah," I said, "I'm good." I wasn't sure that was true, but it was closer to true than it had been in months, and that was something. Spring 2016, 4 months after the filing. San Antonio was warming up the way it does, gradually and then all at once, like someone slowly turning up a burner until the whole city was simmering. The mediation took place in a conference room at Samantha Aldridge's office. Neutral territory, technically, though nothing about that room felt neutral. It smelled like carpet cleaner and recycled air. A long table, 2 chairs on each side, water pitcher in the middle that nobody touched. Ashley sat across from me. I hadn't seen her in 3 months. She'd lost weight, not the slow, stress-related weight loss I'd gone through, something sharper. Her cheekbones were more prominent, her eyes were different, older. She was wearing a blazer I'd never seen, and I realized with a strange detachment that she'd bought new clothes for this. Clothes for the meeting where her marriage officially ended. People dress up for funerals, too. Her attorney, a man named Sebastian Robles who worked out of a small office near the courthouse and drove a 10-year-old Camry, was quiet and competent. He'd advised Ashley not to contest aggressively. The evidence was overwhelming. Fighting would only cost money neither of them had and produce a result that was worse than settling. The terms were straightforward. I got the house. Ashley got her car and personal belongings. The secret credit card debt was hers. The joint savings had already been divided. Samantha presented the financial documentation. Sebastian reviewed it. Ashley stared at the table. Samantha slid the final document across the table. I picked up the pen. It took me less time to sign my divorce papers than it takes to sign for a package at the front door. 3 signatures, 2 initials. The dissolution of 7 years reduced to ink on paper. My hand was steady. I'd expected something, some tremor, some hesitation, some physical acknowledgement from my body that this was significant. There was nothing, just a pen moving across a page. The easiest hard thing I've ever done. Ashley signed after me. Her hand shook. I saw it. She set the pen down and put both hands in her lap and looked at the wall behind my head. Not at me, at the wall. I think if she'd looked at me, she would have cried, and she didn't want to cry here in this room in front of these attorneys and their water pitcher and their carpet cleaner smell. We didn't speak afterward. We walked out of different doors. That was it. 2 weeks later, Sarah called, "It's done." Her voice was different this time, not controlled, not steady. Cracked at the edges, like a wall that had held through the storm and was only now showing the fractures. Mark's divorce had been finalized that afternoon. The judge had reviewed everything. The photos, the taunting messages to me, the voice memo recorded without Ashley's consent, the secret apartment, the hidden debt, the pattern of infidelity Sarah had documented across 15 years. The ruling was devastating. Sarah got the house, full custody of their 2 children, a 12-year-old son named Gabriel and a 9-year-old daughter named Lucia. Mark got supervised visitation every other Saturday. Child support was set at a percentage of his income, which at the moment was 0 because Mark Brewer was unemployed and living in a shelter on the East Side. "He cried," Sarah said. In the courtroom, when the judge read the custody order, he cried. I didn't know what to say to that. "I sat in my car for 30 minutes after," she said. "In the courthouse parking lot, I just sat there." "You okay?" A long pause. "I will be, not today, but I will be." We hung up. I stood in my kitchen. The kitchen where Ashley used to make fajitas, where the phone used to sit face down on the counter, where the coffee maker still gurgled every morning at 5:30 because I'd never changed the timer. The house was mine, and it was empty, and the emptiness had a sound, a low hum of silence that was different from the suffocating silence of the marriage. This silence was just space. Unfurnished space. Waiting to be filled with whatever came next. 2 days later, a voicemail from Mark. Different number, probably a borrowed phone. Adrian, it's Mark. I know you probably won't call me back. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I was messed up. I didn't know what I was doing. I was. A pause, breathing. The breathing of a man who's been crying and is trying not to start again. I'm at the shelter on Guadalupe. I don't have anything. I'm asking. I'm asking if you could talk to Sarah. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I want to see my kids, please. I stood in the kitchen and listened to it twice. Not because I needed to hear it again, but because I wanted to understand what I was feeling. It took a while. The feeling was complicated, layered, like a car with multiple problems where you can't tell which noise is which until you isolate each one. Compassion. That was there, somewhere deep. The human reflex that says another person is suffering and you should help. Mark Brewer was a broken man living in a shelter, begging for access to his children through the phone of a stranger. But underneath the compassion, like a foundation under a building, was memory, the photos, the smile. She's better with me, the voice memo. How's Ashley? The deliberate, calculated cruelty of a man who didn't just steal. He rubbed your face in what he took. I deleted the voicemail. I set the phone on the counter, face up, nothing to hide. Months passed. February 2016 became April. April became June. The seasons shifted. I went to work. I came home. I learned to cook things that weren't fajitas because fajitas belonged to another life, and I was building a new one meal by meal, the way you build anything worth having, slowly, imperfectly, with a lot of burned rice and overcooked chicken along the way. In May, Alexis texted. A long message. Rambling. Full of the particular kind of apologetic energy that comes from someone who's had months to think about what they did and has constructed an elaborate framework of guilt that they now need to share with you so they can feel better about themselves. She was sorry. She should have told me. She thought she was protecting Ashley. She didn't realize silence could be a weapon. She hoped I was doing well. She hoped someday I could forgive her. I read it. I thought about it for about 30 seconds. Then I typed 2 words. I know. That was enough. Not because I'd forgiven her. Because she wasn't important enough to stay angry at. Alexis Herrera was a bystander who chose wrong, and she'd carry that choice without my help. Some people punish themselves more effectively than you ever could. You just have to get out of the way and let them do it. One last thing happened before this chapter of my life closed. The tax refund. The one Ashley and Alexis had discussed in those texts. Wait until tax season, take the refund. Our taxes had been filed jointly before the separation. The refund, $3,200, came in and landed in the account I controlled. Because I'd moved first. Because I'd listened to Samantha. Because patience, it turns out, pays dividends. Literally. I used the money to fix the barbecue grill. The one that had been rusting in the backyard for 2 years. The one I'd been meaning to deal with since we bought the house. The one that represented every small repair I'd postponed because I was too busy or too tired or too distracted by a marriage that was falling apart. I tore the old one out and bought a new one. A Weber. Nothing fancy. I assembled it myself on a Saturday afternoon, following the instructions step by step, tightening each bolt with the same care I used on engine work. I don't know why fixing that grill felt important, but it did. It felt like the first thing I'd built for myself in a very long time. Fall 2016. 1 year since the phone sat face down on the counter, and the fajitas sizzled in the cast iron, and I walked through the front door, and everything looked exactly right and was exactly wrong. I was still at Midas, still on the lift, still smelling like brake fluid at the end of every shift, still popping ibuprofen for the knee I'd never gotten around to seeing a doctor about. Some things don't change. Some things shouldn't. The work was the same. The wrench still fit the same bolts. The coffee in the break room was still terrible. And there was a comfort in that, in the repetition, in the reliable machinery of a job that asked nothing of me except my hands and my time, and gave me back enough money to keep the lights on in a house that was finally fully mine. I'd repainted the bedroom. Took down the photos from the hallway, the wedding shots and the vacation pictures and the framed selfie from the river walk that I used to walk past every morning without really seeing. Bought new sheets, new towels, small purchases that felt like statements. This is mine now. This color, this fabric, this choice, not ours, mine. The house was quieter, obviously. But the quiet was different from what I'd expected. During the marriage, especially near the end, the silence between Ashley and me had been heavy, dense. The silence of two people who had things to say and were choosing not to say them. Now the silence was just absence. The absence of another person's footsteps, another person's shower running, another person's phone buzzing on the nightstand at 2 a.m. Absence can be lonely, but it can also be clean. And clean was something I hadn't felt in a long time. In September, a letter arrived. Not from a lawyer, not from the court. A plain envelope with a Laredo postmark and handwriting I'd know anywhere. Ashley had moved in with her sister down there. She was working at a dental office, same job, different city. She wrote to tell me she was 6 months into therapy and that she'd started understanding things about herself that she'd spent her whole life running from. The chaos of her childhood home, her mother's screaming, her father's absence. The way she'd learned to equate love with intensity, and how Adrian, steady and quiet, had felt like safety at first and then like a cage, and how none of that was my fault and all of it was hers to figure out. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask for anything. She just wrote one line that stopped me where I stood in the hallway, holding the letter in hands that still smelled like brake fluid. "You were the best person I knew and I couldn't handle that. That's not your fault." I sat down on the floor, right there in the hallway, not because my legs gave out, because I needed to be lower, closer to the ground, to something solid, and I cried. For the first time since any of this started, I cried. Not the way I'd imagined, not the cathartic movie-style release where you sob and then feel better. This was quiet, wet, graceless. The crying of a man who'd held it together for 12 months and finally found the one sentence that cracked the seal. I cried for the waste, not for the marriage. The marriage was over, and it should be over, and I don't regret ending it. I cried for the version of us that could have existed. The version where she said these things 2 years ago, or 5 years ago, or before Mark Brewer ever walked out of a Lowe's side entrance and into her passenger seat. The version where she turned to me one night and said, "I'm lonely and I don't know why," and I said, "Then let's figure it out," and we did. That version doesn't exist. It never will. And grieving something that never existed might be the saddest kind of grief there is. I put the letter in a drawer. I didn't respond. Blake, through all of this, had been steady. His own divorce finalized in the summer, amicable, quiet. Carmen and he had simply run out of whatever they'd started with, and they'd had the grace to admit it without burning anything down. He started dating someone new in August, a woman named Diana who worked at a parts supplier on the South Side. Blake told me about her at lunch, grinning, eating his Whataburger with the specific enthusiasm of a man who's discovered that life after divorce doesn't have to be a punishment. "She laughed at my jokes," he said. "Like actually laughed, not the polite thing, the real laugh. You don't have good jokes, Blake." I know, that's how I know she's special. We still ate lunch together every day. Still worked side by side. Still sat in the kind of silence that doesn't need filling because the silence itself is the conversation. He never brought up Ashley. He never mentioned Mark. Some things live in the space between two men and don't need to be spoken because they were there for all of it, in the passenger seat, in the break room, in every extra taco left on a toolbox. Words would only shrink it. Sarah and I kept in touch, loosely, a text every few weeks. "How are you? How are the kids?" Nothing romantic, nothing heading anywhere. Just two people connected by the worst thing that ever happened to them, checking in the way survivors do, making sure the other one is still standing. She'd left Aldridge Family Law, couldn't work there anymore. The place where she'd spent 11 years building other people's divorce cases had become the place where her own marriage fell apart, and every file on every shelf reminded her of it. She'd taken a paralegal position at a real estate firm. Different work. Less destruction. She said it was boring. She said boring was exactly what she needed. Her kids were adjusting. Gabriel, the 12-year-old, had gone quiet. Lucia, the 9-year-old, had started acting out at school. Normal reactions to abnormal circumstances. Sarah was handling it with the same grim competence she applied to everything, which meant therapy for both kids and a strict routine and a refusal to speak badly about Mark in front of them, even though she had enough material to fill a book. Mark was working at a gas station convenience store off Commerce Street, night shifts, sharing a one-bedroom apartment with a roommate he'd found on Craigslist. He sent child support when he could, which wasn't often and wasn't much. Sarah told me this without bitterness, just facts. I don't hate him anymore, she said during one of our brief phone calls. Hate takes energy I'd rather spend on my kids. I admired her for that. I wasn't there yet. I was closer than I'd been in December. But the Lowe's aisle and the smile and the photos were still there, stored in a part of my brain I hadn't figured out how to format. Maybe I never would. Maybe that was fine. Not everything needs to be fixed. Some damage just becomes part of the structure. You build around it. Sunday afternoon. October 2016. A year from where we started, I drove to my father's house. Antonio was on the porch, fixing a gutter this time. He was up on a short ladder, 70% of his body hidden by the roofline, his work boots visible on the second rung, and his hands doing whatever hands do when they're attaching a gutter bracket to a fascia board. The man was 58 years old and still climbing ladders on Sunday afternoons because the gutter needed fixing and he was the one who fixed things. That's who he was. That's who he'd always been. I sat on the porch step with a beer. I watched him work. The sun was low and golden, that particular October light that made the west side look almost beautiful, the cracked sidewalks and chain-link fences and small houses with their patchy yards all glowing in the kind of warmth that doesn't last but is worth noticing while it's there. Antonio came down the ladder, sat next to me. I handed him a beer. He took it. We sat there. You remember that question you asked me, I said, back in November on this porch? I remember. You asked what I wanted to happen after. I did. I think I have an answer. He took a drink, waited. I want to be the kind of man who can sit on a porch on a Sunday and feel the sun and not think about what he lost. Antonio looked at me, a long look. The kind of look that contains everything a man of few words will never say out loud. Are you that man yet? No, but I think I'm getting there. He nodded. That was enough. For Antonio Vega, a nod was a standing ovation. We sat there for a while. The sun moved. The shadows lengthened. Somewhere down the block, a neighbor was mowing their lawn, the sound of the engine rising and falling as they made their turns. A dog barked. A car passed. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary afternoon in an ordinary neighborhood, and I let them wash over me, and I realized that ordinary was not a punishment. Ordinary was the whole point. Ordinary was what I'd been fighting to get back to. The Weber grill I'd bought with the tax refund money sat in my father's backyard. I'd brought it over 2 weeks ago because my yard was too small and his was bigger and he had the patio for it. It was gleaming and unused, brand new, waiting. I was thinking, I said, maybe next weekend, fire up that grill. What are you going to make? I thought about it. The answer came quickly and I was surprised by how sure it felt. I don't know yet, not fajitas, something new. Antonio took a drink of his beer, set it down, looked at the grill. Something new sounds good. We sat there until the sun went down, 2 men on a porch, a father and a son. A gutter that was fixed and a grill that was waiting and a silence between them that was not empty, not heavy, not painful. Just quiet, the good kind of quiet, the kind you choose. People ask me sometimes. Usually at work when a customer makes conversation while I'm writing up their ticket. They see something in my face or they've heard the story from someone who heard it from someone else. They ask, would you do it again? The evidence, the letter, the forward, and the answer is yes. Not because it felt good. It didn't. It felt like surgery without anesthesia. Every cut was necessary and every cut hurt and the healing took longer than the operation. But here's what I know now, sitting on this porch with a beer in my hand and the sound of my father's breathing beside me and the last light of a Sunday afternoon dying over the rooftops of the west side. Silence isn't peace. Silence is just a slower way of bleeding out, and I was done bleeding.